Greetings, Metallurgist Marty here from Heavy Metallurgy with another review. This time, a little something different. Collaboration for one of the finest death metal releases from 2024 via the veteran band Nile. I have been joined by S. Craig Zahler and Melanie from Melanie Loves Death Metal to have a pretty deep discussion regarding the band's latest album, The Underworld Awaits Us All. So if you want a comprehensive dive into the workings of this highly nuanced, technical, and amazing album, stick around. Welcome everybody to Heavy Metallurgy, and we're doing something a little bit different today. It's going to be kind of an overview or discussion on the latest Nile album. But before we get into that, I just want to, before I introduce everybody, which you all know them, we're going to talk about Jeff Wagner, our friend Jeff Wagner. We mentioned on the show before that they had a cataclysmic fire. They lost some of their pets in the fire. They lost all of their worldly possessions, and their GoFundMe page to help them out is in the description. Please go check it out and help them. There's been an amazing response, but when you're rebuilding, buying spatulas and socks and underwear and bath towels, I mean, a couple bucks here and there, it helps out a bunch. So please go help support that.
Yeah, and he's a great dude, and obviously Marty and I met through the Metal Maniacs magazine back in the day, and I've gone on to do a lot of different things and write about heavy metal. Obviously, heavy metal is a core interest of mine and always has been and always will be. And friendships were forged there, and he's a great dude, and it's a real rough time for him. I mean, he narrowly escaped with his life. It was that fire just engulfed that house, and it was sort of by minutes that he escaped, and he doesn't have much. So anyone who could contribute anything, it's greatly appreciated. He is a pillar in the metal community, and a great friend of mine as well.
Me too, and I look up to the guy. He gave me a chance back in the day, getting me on Metal Maniacs. If it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't be doing this today. Who knows? But he's a mentor in a lot of ways. He's a super awesome guy, and it just sucks to see anybody suffer like this, let alone someone that you consider a close friend. So yeah, if you can help out, please do so below. But my guests today are Melanie Loves Death Metal. Melanie, welcome back. How are you?
Doing good. Happy to be here.
Good. Excellent. Thank you for joining us. And of course, that's Craig Zahler. Welcome back again, my friend. How are you doing?
My pleasure. I love coming on the show and chatting about metal, the core driving force in my life. So
absolutely
looking forward to digging in. Also very excited to share this to share the stage with Melanie. I've watched her program for years now, and I feel in terms of learning about new releases in the underground, death metal and actually black metal, I feel I've gotten maybe like 7 or 8 of the best black metal albums of the last few years by watching her show. She's just really tapped in. So anyone who's watching this program who's not subscribed to her station should subscribe. It's great. And I learn about more new cool stuff there than maybe the top 2 or 3 other websites I go to combined. And it's a great show. And she's a diehard, and she knows what she's talking about.
Full agreement. I love watching your show, Mel, and having you on the channel as well. Part of it. You're one of our contributors, and we greatly appreciate it.
Appreciate it. It's good to hear when people take recommendations that I talk about and then they enjoy them. That's usually what I like to hear the most. Also surprised by the black metal, because I feel like that's like such a very minimal thing that I talk about.
I was going to say that's the one you talk about the least, but yeah.
But I'm going to point out something, because like someone who is nonstop listening to black metal, like a dude who posts top 50 black metal albums of the year, is listening to so much black metal that sometimes the stuff that person is going to like is just the stuff that's the oddest or the most progressive or the most different. So someone who isn't listening to 200 black metal albums a year but needs something more to draw, him or her into it, like that might be more trustworthy taste. As I said, like I think each year 3 or 4 of my favorite black metal albums are coming from your station, and it might be because you don't listen to 300 black metal albums a year, but maybe, I don't know, 75, and then there are the top 10 that rise to the cream of the crop, whether it's like, Vigadude or whatever it winds up being. And I know it's Melanie loves death metal, so I'm just pointing out that there's other stuff on the station, and some of that stuff has been very valuable to me.
It's cool here. Yeah, I feel like this year a lot of the top stuff that I'm listening to is stuff that I actually haven't talked a whole lot on my channel, because it's stuff I've been trying to enjoy a little bit, like personally, like behind the scenes. So I feel like my top albums this year will be a little bit surprising, because I know there's going to be a couple of things there where I've maybe glazed over it briefly, but haven't fully talked about it as much as I have done in the past with my stuff like this. So yeah, I appreciate all the kind words. I'm excited to be here and meeting with you, because you are one of my first followers of my channel that has been openly engaged, from the very beginning. And then obviously through Heavy Metallurgy is where I know you and see you on past episodes. So it's fun to do this. I like doing these collaborations. I wish I would do them more. I've often said I need to do it more on my channel. Maybe next year. Maybe next year I'll get around to doing it. But yeah, happy to be here.
Well, today we are here to discuss Nile, The Underworld Awaits Us All, which came out on August 23rd, 2024 on Napalm Records. This is their 8th full-length album, and it's one thing that's different. There's always lineup changes, it seems, in Nile, and they've got 2 new dudes and 3 guitar players now. So I don't know how that's panning out live. I haven't seen any live clips.
My understanding, let me just interject for a moment, is that this Brian Kingsland is not touring around with him, that he was involved with the conception of these songs. He's on the album. He co-wrote and wrote I think 3 of the tracks, but I don't know that he's going around. I think it's that Dan Vadim Bond, the guy who's in Morbid Angel, and Zach Jeter. I think that those are the guys going around with Carl, and Brian Kingsland was involved with conceiving this and plays on this album and wrote stuff, but I don't know that he is a touring member, and I don't know that he will be involved in the genesis of tunes of theirs in the future. So I could be wrong on this. Put comments below if I am, but I've watched an interview or 2 with Carl talking about it, and I think that's the way it went. Yeah.
Well, their 8th album, initial impressions. What do you think about this thing? It's a beast of a record. Melanie, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts?
I think this is by far better than their last release, Vile Melodic Rites. I think it's, for me personally, I think it's probably one of the best albums that they've made in their discography, to be honest with you. I obviously love the first 4 albums of Nile. It's probably frequent listens I listen to all the time. This is also one of my favorites. I know I'm kind of in the minority here. A lot of people kind of have a lot of negative things to say about it.
That album is great. That's a top tier album for me. But
yeah, I think it. Honestly, I think I might hold it a little bit higher than this album at the moment. I think this is. I was actually pretty shocked. I think I said that I made a video about this where I didn't have high expectations. I assumed that it would probably be much of the same of what they had put out within their last output. And then that first song, I was like, okay, no, they're fast, they're aggressive, they're in your face. They came with more brutality. It just immediately knocked me away. I couldn't believe what I was listening to. And I was immediately happy, because I feel like they just felt more energized. There was a resurgence here. I didn't dislike the last album that they put out.
I liked it. It was good.
I quite enjoyed it, but this one, just something about it seems a little bit different. I don't know if maybe is that extra guitar layer, just maybe the songwriting, and the themes are obviously still the same across the board, but just it seems like they may have had a little bit more fun, a little bit more engaging with writing this album. So as soon as I heard it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is not what I expect to hear. I didn't expect it to be as fast and aggressive in your face as it was.
Right on. What about you, S? What do you think?
I think it's great. I mean, it's one of my 2 or 3 favorite metal albums of the year, and I've been following them since the beginning. Just a brief aside. the first heavy metal writing I did was a self-printed fanzine in the 90s called The Ultimate Steel Dissector. And in that first issue, I reviewed Kiss and Blue Oyster Cult and Oxyplagats and Nile. And it was kind of all over the place. And Thin Lizzy and just a wide variety of things. I think Emperor, that might have been the second issue. All of this different stuff was in there. And the first words of encouragement I ever got it was a letter written by Carl Sanders into my magazine that, like in the old days when you would write a letter and stick it in an envelope and it arrived in the mail. So he encouraged me and said a lot of really nice things. And then maybe the second interview I did for Metal Maniacs, the first was my arguing with Bruce Dickinson and when he'd returned to Maiden. And then that might have been the second was for Black Seeds of Vengeance, talking to him on the phone. And he was, again, really kind and remembered that he'd written it. So I always have sort of, earlier we mentioned Jeff Wagner and the bad situation he's dealing with. And that's the first person who ever paid me to write. The first metal musician whom I admired to ever reach out to me or say something kind was Carl Sanders. And it was interesting. In my review of Amongst the Catacombs of Nephren-Ka was critical. It wasn't negative, but I saw that album and still see that album as an album with a massive amount of potential, as opposed to an album that is landing this band in the finalized form or the best things that they could do. And I see that album sort of like the Festivals of Atonement, the demo EP, though at 32 minutes, I just feel it's an album. I feel that those two things are unique in their discography in terms of what they're trying to do. And Black Seeds of Vengeance is definitely the transition to the form that would sort of mutate and change over time. But in terms of the new album, The Underworld Awaits Us All, I think in the last 3-4 weeks, I've been on a Nile bender. I've listened to the entire catalog multiple times. I probably listened to the new album about 12 times. What Should Not Be Unearthed probably about 8 times, because that one just continues to rise and rise in my estimation. And for me at this point, I think The Underworld Awaits Us All is their second best album. I think it's absolutely jaw-dropping. We're going to go song by song in it, but sort of on a macro level, there is all of the fire and aggression that Melanie mentioned, but at the same time, there's also flow and innovation. And what can I just say, but hats off for what I think is probably the most daring and innovative move I've heard in a band with this amount of brutality and technicality, which is bringing in an almost gospel sounding choir of women. Yeah. And when if someone told me this idea, I don't know, I wouldn't roll my eyes if it were Nile, because I think Carl Sanders is a real deal composer like Ihsahn. And like I haven't followed the Ihsahn's solo stuff because that stuff appeals to me less. But I think there's a real composer in that guy's heart, the same way there is with Nile. So I would give it the chance, but never, ever, ever would I have expected a gospel choir to be an excellent addition that I want to see in every Nile album going forward. Never would have guessed that this idea would land this well. And now I hear those parts and I get chills. And, I'm thinking of, maybe the greatest singer-songwriter in rock history, Roger Waters, and obviously working with Gilmour and, and all the innovations in, Dark Side of the Moon and Animals and all of that sort of stuff. And I'd seen David Gilmour recently live, and he's played a whole bunch of stuff that that was, let's say, very below par considering what he could have played. But having those women supplying that backing vocal, it just gives another amazing color to that music. And that works this incredibly well in a brutal death metal context. It's just, again, bravo. It was a risk. And it's something that the first time you hear it is a surprise. I did not know it was going to be on this album going in. And yet of reviews I've read and seen, it's kind of like 100% of people like this edition, which is a real surprise considering what it is in the context.
Right.
So I think it's great. I say right now it's my second favorite Nile album ever, and I wouldn't be surprised if a year from now it's number one, because after the first 5 or 6 spins, it was probably at number 5 or 4. And then it was just like, oh no, it's just this, like the really good songs continue to get better and better. The couple that I'm not that into sort of stayed where they were, but like the major part of this album, just my affinity for it grew and grew and grew. So I'm a huge fan of it. And the production is phenomenal. This is so well produced. It's so beautifully produced, both in the clarity and separation of instruments and the ideas put in. Like, well, here's a gong to sort of ease the segue into this, you know, tremolo picked Egyptian melody sort of thing. And just really well produced on all of the ends. The bass is a little bit more audible here. I think maybe Black Seeds of Vengeance to me might have the clearest bass in terms of the tone really popping out. But it really comes out in interesting spots. And it's also nice that it's more than just root note stuff going on when I can hear it.
Well, for me, you know, Zahler kind of hit on the part, you know, when they started out, they were a good band, but they have obviously evolved as they've progressed throughout the years. And, you know, you get a lot of musicians in the death metal sphere in particular. You hear a lot of people say, oh, I prefer the demo or the debut. Because let's be real, a lot of bands, they kind of hit their peak early on. They'll put out a couple good albums after that. And then they start to just kind of fall into a creative rut. And the thing that's always inspired me about listening to a new Nile album is the fact that Carl really doesn't do that. He is really, you could tell he's all in on what he does with this project. And he is down to learn from past things that might not have worked so well or things that worked really well. And he's just been a work in progress, and it's gotten better and better, more complex and more crazy. Yet somehow he, you know, nails it all down. No matter how complex or crazy it gets, there's still an aura of memorability. There's hooks in these songs, even though they're crazy, weird hooks, they're there. And, you know, focusing on Egyptian scales or nodes or whatever the hell it is, it's just so different from what everybody else is doing in the scene. I just kind of see the Underworld Awaits Us All as kind of like the end boss of Nile right now. And I kind of listen to this. I'm like, God, how is he going to, is this going to be a lateral move? The next album going to be the same, or how is he going to go to the next realm? And there really hasn't been a Nile album I've disliked. I've liked them all. And yes. I really like taking this, you know, when we have to break down and go into each track, it's difficult for me because when I listen to an album, I take in an album as a whole. I don't look at the track listing. I typically don't care. And the way this thing is composed, it flows so well from start to finish. You know, the gong, the little, you know, cultural, atmospheric things they put in between tracks on occasion or within the song themselves. You know, the woman choir. It's just all these little things come together and just made it such a very warm, and it's a very organic album, which I'm looking at where this was recorded. Serpent-Headed Studios in Greensville, South Carolina, which I'm assuming is Carl's studio.
Yes, it's pretty much self-produced by Callias and Sanders.
Yep. And the drums recorded by GK, George Callias, studio engineered in Athens, Greece. So, and the big thing for me is when you start getting death metal this fast and complex, what's the first thing that typically suffers? The drums. The drums are typically triggered to the hilt. They're mechanically enhanced, so there's clarity there because you start adding a lot of layers of gain and all these complex things and speed. Kick drums are lost, toms are lost, cymbals are lost. I listen to this thing and it sounds like, I'm sure there's triggers employed in the recording of this. They're mixed in to some extent, but it's a very roomy sound. It's a very organic sound. This is the best sounding Nile record in a while. I listened to like snippets of the couple albums leading up to this, and they all sound great, but this just sounds more alive and vibrant. And it really highlights the fact that these songs they're really special. I always kind of put this band in the same box as Morbid Angel. It's easy to do that because they used to share the same management. They went on tour together all the time because they had the same management. But Morbid Angel lost the plot. They lost the plot. They fell off the death metal train big time for me, where Nile, though they may have similar things that happen in their music on occasion that can compare them to Morbid Angel, they they've earned their own independence from that and stand alone. I don't know. I think it's a great record, and I'm interested to talk about it. Melanie, we've both kind of talked about the production. Did you want to throw anything about the production before we moved on?
Oh, I think it sounds way better than the last several albums. I mean, Vile and Noetic Rites had a little bit of a muddiness to it. And same thing with this. This actually has pretty, not the best production, honestly. Same thing with this thing, too. You know, like, this is pretty muddy production. Like, they really, it seems like they maybe took a little bit more time to go through every layer and really mix it really well. So yeah, I think it sounds phenomenal. The drums are just incredible on this album, and they're just there. They're in every single song. They're just, I feel like they're just they truly are the backbone of the album for sure. Yeah. So yeah, sounds phenomenal.
Such an inspiring player, and like we were mentioning, talking before we started recording, you know, seeing him live play, it's just he enters into this meditative state, and he's like looking with his eyes closed, not even paying attention to what he's doing. And when my band opened for him in Detroit some years ago before the pandemic, and he broke I think it was a kick pedal. I don't know. He just hits so hard and so clear and so precise. It's just, wow. And all the little nuances and fills and things he does really does contribute to the music. He's the metronome of the band, but he's also a creative force behind he enhances these riffs in ways that you may not really think about while you're listening to it. But if you really sit and focus, it's pretty amazing. And, you know, as a drummer yourself, Craig, I mean, you can probably attest to the fact that this dude is doing some stuff that's pretty bonkers. I think this is like one of maybe the 5 best extreme metal drum performances ever. Like this, I listened to this thing, and I've always really, really liked his playing, and he came on with Annihilation of the Wicked, and until this album, my favorite drum performance on any of their albums was In Their Darkened Shrines, which is Tony Laureano, and there is a live quality to that, and I think that was their last album to tape, probably like DAT or ADAT or one of those kinds of tapes. But there are imperfections in that I didn't hear in the one before, which I think is Derek Roddy. I think Derek Roddy came in, and this was the one when I interviewed Carl Sanders for Maniacs, and he just said, like, Roddy would just sit down and do these in one take. And because he was a human metronome, he is unbelievable. When I was learning how to do blast beats, I bought his video cassette and would practice the way he showed, and that was how I learned how to do blast beats, was with the Derek Roddy piece. That said, was drooling part of that video? Because I remember being in the living room one day with you.
Was not part of that, but
you did. You should start your own video then.
Yeah, no, it wasn't drool and play in your boxer shorts. That was not part of the instruction.
Yes,
but he did have this whole thing of like just working on building up your stamina in each hand, so you could just so that you could just sort of pass them off. There's going to be a point where if you're going really, really fast with a blast, you kind of hit the critical threshold, and you're going to slow down and need to play something else. So the idea that you sort of get your hands similar so you can do blasts with one and then switch to the other. And his kit was interesting. He had snares. He had multiple snares in different spots, partly to facilitate doing stuff like this, where he could just kind of blast forever by alternating all that sort of stuff. But in terms of George Kallias' performance on this, this was the one where I thought he matched what Tony Laureano did in Their Darkened Shrines. Now, In Their Darkened Shrines, there are tiny little errors insofar as like a 32nd note or 16th note hesitation in coming in on something. And I say this is all completely untouchable performances for me. It's not that I could do it. My ears are better than my abilities. And I can hear in the performance for In Their Darkened Shrines that I can hear a spontaneity. I also hear in, and I don't know how to pronounce his name, Urain Serenpaz, the guy who's playing drums for The Crown on Hell Is Here and Death Race King. And those are in the conversation for me as well in terms of a very live and spontaneous thing. Yeah. And George Kallias' performance on this and kind of all these albums is perfect in a different way. So I don't listen to this and think that he was making up stuff as he went, whereas that Tony Laureano performance in Their Darkened Shrines, when he's doing that thing in the break in Unas where he's doing the drum rolls and with his feet, and he does that thing that you hear in Iron Maiden's Ides of March and Deep Purple's Child in Time, and then it switches out into this other spot. It's incredible, and it feels alive. Like that, all of that stuff, because of this, it just doesn't sound in any way quantized. But George Calais, clearly a next level player. I don't know how many people could possibly do these songs. You know, like there are obviously really techie guys out there, whoever the drummer is for Archspire or whatever, but actually doing this in terms of the stamina and the precision with the feet and all of this sort of stuff. So his stuff comes out perfect, but perfection can sometimes land in a not interesting place. I'm not the biggest Gene Hoglan fan, though his work in Death I think is really good. And I'm not a fan of Asgeir Mikkelsen, who in Borknagar, I just felt like this guy's a living drum machine. He's perfect, but he's always dividing up. It's like it's a even triplets if he's kind of going around all the toms, or perfect 16th notes, or you know, it always felt measured in that way. In this album, not only does this have the inhuman George Calais perfection, but particularly in some of the slow sections, it is the tastiness of someone like a Vinny Appice or Frost, who is maybe my favorite extreme metal drummer of all time, where you just, there's an amount of personality coming out in the beat choices. It isn't always filling in all the spaces, sometimes going around the toms but leaving a weird space and then doing a flam or something like that. This is a legendary Hall of Fame performance, and I've always really, really liked his work, but I always felt the Tony Laureano performance on In Their Darkened Shrines was kind of the best because of the spontaneity. Even though this doesn't have some of those slight hesitations and imperfections, creatively, I think it even exceeds what Laureano did on In Their Darkened Shrines, and it is absolutely masterful. So yeah, this guy, Calais, is credited with co-songwriting kind of all of this, maybe other than the one interlude. And I don't know if that's actually he's ever coming up with riffs, because he can play. He has a solo album. I have it somewhere nearby. He has a solo album where he's playing all the riffs and doing it. So he could actually generate that material. But even if he's not, if he's just helping arrange this stuff in these parts are as musically complex as the most complicated guitar parts on the album consistently. It's a brilliant, brilliant performance, and definitely for extreme heavy metal, the best I've heard in years and years in terms of this stuff. It is an absolutely incredible performance. It is a tour de force from a drummer who seems to kind of live in the zone of constantly delivering tour de forces, and yet this one I think is a full notch better than his other best work.
Yeah.
Mostly because of some of that slow stuff where he's coming up with those super tasty, like Vinny Appice spaces and gaps, like that amazing stuff that Vinny would do on the Dio albums, and some of those really cool beats that Frost would come up with in Satyricon, but then also the blazing shit that Frost would do in 1349. So
1349,
it's phenomenal stuff. And it's worthy of study. If someone said this is the best drum performance of all time, I would not bother to disagree. There are some I like more, but it is absolutely a pinnacle. And hats off to this guy. So it's every single song is dramatically enhanced by that. It isn't timekeeping. It is frontal, almost melodic embellishment at times in terms of what he's doing.
Agreed. And, you talk about George's performance here. You got to also talk about the songs themselves, what Carl and the other guys have put into this, the guitar work. I mean, I listen to stuff. I'm a pseudo guitar player, and when I listen to this album and I just hear this stuff, and it blows my mind. The fact that, I mean, I like technically challenged music, but a lot of it is soulless to me. It can be super busy, and I just think a lot of these guys are more interested in showing what they can do instead of writing a song that has something that sticks with the listener. That's why albums like this in particular, it blow me away so much, because the music itself is very complex. But, as I mentioned earlier, Carl has come up with his way of playing. It's just so melodic. And even though it's like a really busy ascending riff that's a bunch of notes in it, there's feel and soul in every note. You could tell the guys listen to a ton of Thin Lizzy. I think Craig was telling me it's one of his favorite bands. So, yeah. Though you don't sit and listen, oh, this sounds like Thin Lizzy. I mean, he has studied at the altar of the greats and knows, melodically speaking, what it takes to, I'm going to be super technical and crazy here, but I'm also going to write a song at the end. You're going to be winded after listening to it, but damn it, you're going to come away with, I remember that riff, or, oh, they recall this refrain, or this one speed riff comes back and I remember it. It's because there's melody mixed in with the technicality. And, Carl isn't the only songwriter here. The other guys too. I'm not going to just pin us all. Carl's been the constant. I mean, the foundation and the heart of this is him, of course. But wow, the guitar playing, and he knows when to let up off the accelerator too. When you throw in those doomy riffs. I mean, the last third of this record. There's a lot more doom than there is at the beginning. It's like the first part is you're riding down a hill on fire, and the second half of it, well, the last few songs are very. There's that speed at the turn of a transition, but there's a lot of doomier chords and more emotion. What do you guys think about the guitar playing and stuff on here? We'll start with you, Mike.
I think Carl Sanders is probably my favorite death metal guitarist, or just straight across the board. He's just very, like, the fact that he's so technical, like you said, it's not in a sense of where he's just showing off and like, yes, I can play this and I can write this really extremely technical, brutal death metal and just put your mind through a warp. Like he adds like a sort of melodicism to it and other layering. Like you said, like on this album, towards the second half of the album, there is that doomier element to it. And he has done that on past albums as well, where it's not just slow, fast, brutal aggression. Like he adds,
you got to mix it up.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I love about his songwriting, because obviously I listen to a lot of death metal. I listen to a lot of brutal death metal, and I listen to a lot of like new brutal death metal. And that is typically where the flaws start to happen, is when they just are continuously writing like the brutal aggression music nonstop, where it's just that across the board. The whole entire album is just the same riffs, the same aggression, whereas he adds that like extra layering into it. And like you can tell that he's like a creative writer when it comes to his style of music and what he does with his guitar, even just as a whole, from like the whole entire composition, from every single like aspect of all the instrumentation on these albums. Sometimes guitarists, they just stay in their own lane, and that's what they do, and they let other bands do. But I think he has a pretty strong hand in just writing a song and then with the whole entire band as well. So yeah, I think the guitars on here are probably some of the best that they've had on any of their albums. And those are generally what I tend to enjoy most about Nile, because again, I think he's such a phenomenal player. But George Callias, ever since he came on from Annihilation of the Wicked, which has been one of my all-time favorite Nile albums for the longest time, I think he just is such a, like, him and Carl are like that 1-2 death metal punch that I just feel like are so hard to top, even now after all these years. So yeah. But again, I think these are some of the best guitars that I think they've written in their career so far.
Agreed. Craig.
Yeah, I mean, the backbone of this band is the driving force that comes from these riffs. Like this is where it's going to begin, and something that I when I wrote in the Ultimate Steel Dissector, when I wrote about Amongst the Catacombs of Nephren-Ka, I found that album had a whole lot more potential. There was stuff that I enjoyed and things I heard. I'm like, oh, and Smashing the Antu, is that break from Thin Lizzy's Emerald? And certain little kind of nods to completely different sort of music. And there's the point at which, I don't think Carl Sanders is someone who's getting all of that technique down to impress anybody. I think if there's ever going to be a flaw with having that level of technique and employing it, It's that he's going to be the kind of guy who wants to challenge himself. And I'd see that as not motivated in a bad vein way of like, look what I can do in terms of all of this like fretboard wizardry. But if you're playing at the bleeding edge of extremity for 30 years, that finding a new challenge and getting a new technique down and pushing yourself and pushing yourself and pushing yourself, that makes sense. So I've always liked the mid-pace licks and the doomy aspect of the band. If it was the relentless speed, I would probably tire of it a little bit more. My favorite album by them is Ichthyphallic, and I know that's not a common choice for almost.
It's a good album.
I love that album.
That album, that run of songs from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's the best run of songs on any of their albums, and one of the best runs of songs on any death metal album, if not the best run of songs. Like when I'm thinking of Carcass and Morbid Angel, Necros Christos, and Bolto are like my favorite death metal bands. I'm not sure that they ever have something that is that run of songs. And in terms of guitar playing, I spoke with Carl Sanders at a Milwaukee Metal Fest that I went with Marty. And I walked up to Sanders and I was buying a bunch of old Scorpions albums and we were talking a bit about those. And he was sanding the fretboards or the fretboard on his guitar, which I'm not sure if it was a Fender or Gibson. I'm a drummer. So it was
that cream colored thing he used to play. It was a Fender's.
It's that cream colored thing he used to play. It's a Fender. That's what I thought. So he was sanding the frets. And I said, and I looked at that, and I said, and I was like, oh, this is that kind of scalloped fretboard. And I looked at that thing. I said, so you can bend the notes by squeezing. And when I hear that, like Eat of the Dead, the Eat of the Dead, and then there's a rah, 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 I always think of that scalloped fretboard, and I think of that as a riff that's squeezed rather than strummed. And I don't know that that's the case. I don't know. I mean, if you're squeezing it a half step, it could be the same of just you start with a bend and let it decline or however it works. But his playing, there's a ton of heart and there's a ton of soul. And for me, there are 3 tiers of Nile albums. My least favorite albums of theirs I still enjoy. I have them all, and they're all worth owning. And my least favorite ones, and Amongst the Catacombs of Nephren-Ka, is to me towards the bottom. That is much. I feel that that's much more of a kind of repulsive experience rather than an immersive experience, insofar as throwing the listener out and assaulting the listener and surprise left turns and short songs that are a little bit more kind of although the playing isn't grindcore, a little bit more in that spirit of like, you're not going to ride this horse, we're going to keep throwing you off. And I prefer the more immersive stuff. But then, like Keftu Asar Buchu, like you have these burners that move through all these parts fluidly, but you can barely stay on the horse. And those are excellent as well. So, the guitar playing is driving all of this. And when more interesting stuff, when more varied stuff and held chords and doom and mid-pace stuff started coming in, which I think was really best landed for the first time on In Their Darkened Shrines, that to me was when they made a real qualitative leap into, insofar as their songcraft.
Right.
He's a unique visionary in this field, because you can have that boiling, and he tunes to drop A, right?
I don't know. Probably. I don't know.
It's incredibly deep, and so that's one of the things. If the production isn't spot on and you're playing stuff that's that fast and that deep, some of the articulation can be lost, which is never the case for me on the new album. Certainly on like something like Multitude of Foes or whatever on Black Seeds of Vengeance, some of that stuff just sounds like it's boiling rather than like kind of cleanly articulated with the sound. I think they're playing a little bit beyond the technology and the clarity of what's there. And I'm sure they're playing it completely cleanly. It's just not like there's stuff on Black Seeds throughout Black Seeds of Vengeance where it just sounds like water boiling to me rather than an articulated riff.
Yeah. It's got to be technological advances in recording. I mean, plus he's been doing it for how many years now? He just kind of knows what to do at this point, especially he's been doing it all by himself for so long. But, kind of went through all that stuff. We kind of talked about doing a track by track analysis. So, Melanie, why don't you get going? We'll start with track 1, which is
what's it called again?
Stelae of Vultures.
Stelae of Vultures.
I think it's Stelae, and like kind of like the AE and at the end of algae. I think it's pronounced that way, but maybe not. I know if it's singular, it like Stella, it would be sort of a Stella. But I think it's pronounced, Stelae of Vultures. I could be wrong. Okay. But I looked it up at some point, and that's what I'm remembering.
I think this is by far one of the best opening tracks on an album in a long time. Like, if you're not sucked in by this song when you first hear this album, this album might be lost on you at that point, because it really sets the tone for what you're about to hear, as well as like with the overall like themes of Nile. Like, obviously that old Egyptian sound is there, but it's done in like such a more, I don't even know, like a much more aggressive sound. I get like just the clarity on this album is so good. Like, it sounds like just that first song is so brutal. It's so aggressive. It's so in your face. The vocal styles, like just the gutturals that he does, like the lower gutturals, obviously are still on this album, but the higher pitch, like screaming that he has on here just sounds so phenomenal. Like, you hear that right away. Like, his voice is not lost whatsoever. Like, that's a clear indication that he still has the vocal styles are still there. There's no like aging sounding in them. And just the riffs, the guitar riffs on this song. It's a 6-minute track. I mean, that's a pretty long death metal song to start off an album. I mean, they don't shy away from long songs at all. They never have. But I think that it's just one of the best openers for an album, at least this year. I mean, even just across the board, it caught me right away as soon as I heard it. I tend to sing this one the most. It tends to get stuck in my head the most. I always hate when I like fall in love with the first track on an album, because it seems so easy, because it's always the first one that you hear. But like, I could listen to that song for an hour straight and never get tired of it. It's definitely one of the stronger songs on the album. I think there are several other songs on here that I absolutely love, but it's so good. Just, it's so hard. It goes so heavy too. Like, you're just like, man, they really came for this album. Like, you can tell that they really wanted to take somebody from me who's been a Nile fan, since Amongst the Catacombs, and like really think like, okay, this band is still here. They still got this. They're still making amazing music, and they're still relevant, if not still one of the best death metal albums around, like in terms of like legacy bands. Like, that song, incredible. 10 out of 10. One of the best songs on the album. I absolutely love it. I don't even know what else to say about it. I'm sure, Zahler, you'll probably have so much more details around it.
Do tell.
It's a terrific opener, and I think Nile has consciously made the decision to have a statement of intent opener, and
for sure, yeah,
they do that. A lot of times they're not my favorite songs, because rather than the statement of intent, like something like Eat of the Dead or To Walk Forth from Flames Unscathed, two of my favorite songs, by the band ever. I like it when they sink into it and have the really aggressive parts, but I like their tunes that are a little bit more expansive and grooved and all of that sort of stuff. So I think probably the second or third time I heard this, I'm like, oh, this is like a Cast Down the Heretic, but better. And it's really, really good. And in terms of statement of intent, so a lot of times, you kind of have the fanfare of beginning. You have the heavy, like the blah, and then there's a giant drum fill. So a giant drum fill in a normal band might be a measure long, like 1, 2, 3, 4, or in a band where they really want to go a little bit more, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, like 2 measures. So the first time Callias takes his turn, his announcing moment, a 3-measure drum fill. So an odd choice, but of course this is a band that's constantly playing with meter. And then you get the heavy part again. Yes. And then you get a drum fill that is 7 measures long. 7 measures. 28 beats of drum fill madness. And in terms of statement of intent, George Callias is letting you know, buckle in for the tour de force. And there's the China crash that commences it, like the most critical, like whether expertly used and sworn to black by Sandoval or Lombardo in a lot of his spots, like tastily using that symbol is really key. And then this thing just starts going, and there's the back and forth. Certainly, there's going to be some discussion. This is the second album without Dallas Toller Wade. The previous album, Nile, Violatic Rites, didn't have him either. And I like a couple of songs on an album, Seven Horns of War and the title cut in particular. But for me, that was a very big step down from What Should Not Be Unearthed, and which to me is a top tier album. And then the last album is probably a third tier of their 3 tiers. Again, I like all of these albums, but I do like to rank and rate, and that's where they landed. So Dallas Toller Wade had a very clear enunciating style. And my favorite vocalist for this band has always been and will always be Carl Sanders. I like the gutturals. I like unintelligible, sneery shit where you don't need – it's just a vowel soup. And in that vowel soup, I feel you get the most kind of inhuman creature quality. So, like, if I ever, like, my request to the band would always be, like, the more that you want to put on, the better. That said, they spend a lot of time on these lyrics, and that shit is wholly unintelligible to me unless I'm looking at a lyric sheet. I maybe understand 1 word out of 40 in a guttural style if I'm not looking at a lyric sheet. It's just not intelligible.
Yeah.
And so whoever's doing the voice here, and in terms of the voice, that kind of higher register, that kind of Fry voice, that's really nicely offset. And one of the things with Dallas Toller Wade was he really enunciated stuff, and I feel like a little bit more in the Jeff Walker style. But again, Carcass is my favorite death metal band of all time. I always wanted more Bill Steer singing. I like Bill Steer's vocals more than Jeff Walker's, even though Jeff Walker's kind of the de facto fault, like the default lead guy of that band, and certainly for certain albums is the guy. So I think it's kind of a lateral move in terms of the quality of this other vocalist. And do we know if this is Zach Jeter or if this is? Or is it?
Zach Jeter.
It is that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know those two people enough to be able to say. But that Fry voice is really good. And one thing that I think, even if it's Dallas Toller Wade's voice was deeper and had that kind of barked quality and was a little bit deeper in terms of pitch, he also would get into a little bit more, I feel, regular rhythmic groupings. And I feel that these vocals, they're a little less predictable in terms of where they land on the beats. And that's always, always, always a preference of mine with death metal. As much as I like both of the Cannibal Corpse singers, but my least favorite thing that both of those guys do is, like, let me just put a syllable on every beat or every other beat, or sing even triplets over like, duple meter or whatever it is. And so if this is Zach Jeter, this guy is more, I think I might like the quality of Dallas Toller Wade's voice a tiny bit more because of the deepness of it, but the rhythmic lines that Zach Jeter is coming up with, I think, are better. So to me, it's just a shift. And obviously the handoffs between that voice and Carl's are even more pronounced because that voice to me sounds a little bit higher. So this song is kind of like, I think kind of overall, this is, I feel like the omega of what they started on amongst the catacombs of Nephren-Ka. And it is the kind of song that is constantly taking these left turns and has all of these surprises. There's kind of the driving Lombardo beat or polka beat or whatever you want to call it, the way that Lombardo does it. You have that riff going on, which is which is like a kind of a very short chugging lick that gets repeated, and then all these tags get added on, and Callias adds these blasts that hook up with it. But I never have any idea. And again, I've listened to this album at least 12 times, and this song is very, very strong. I'm never quite sure how long those tags are going to go or when we're moving on, but I'm with it. So to me, it isn't like the like Smashing the Antu or Pestilence and Iniquity and some of that stuff, where I feel I'm getting thrown off of the horse, and only through memorizing and listening to the album like 50 times can I anticipate all this stuff. This, I feel, keeps me on board, but continues to be surprising. So one of the things that's going on with Calais' work that makes it so phenomenal in this album is there's all the stuff where he's enhancing the riff and driving the music. But there's shit on this album, and I don't feel I heard this as much from him before, where I feel he's deliberately fighting the music, where it's combative against the riff. And so there's this, there's a hammer-on lick at 122 in this song. Calais kind of plays with it, and then he plays across it. And his accents are not the same as the accents that are in the guitar. And this is something that's really interesting in a feature of this album, where there's this kind of, and clearly at this point, Carl Sanders and Calais are going to have an extreme form of synergy with playing this kind of music for this long. I mean, it's phenomenal that Calais, like, frankly, that he has survived, that he can physically play this for as many years as he has.
And he's still in the band for being all the way across the world. They don't live in the same, they're not jamming every week. You know?
Right. But the fact that you can tour this, and I remember talking to this about, because I saw them when they had Pete Hamura, and I saw them when they had Tony Laureano, and I saw them when they had Calais. And I said, and there was a little, one of the questions I was kind of digging in on was like, how long can you last? This is really very, very taxing stuff at the very limits of human achievement. And it's not just your fingers when you're a drummer, it's all four limbs.
Yeah.
And
joints.
and the strain and how that goes. But so there's like those little digressions with that hammer on, like the bum 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 bum, that thing, and then the blast beats are like there is blasting with it, and then Calais is playing, I feel, against it. It's incredible. And then there's a nicer melody that comes in at 1:45 and 2 minutes, where you get to relax, and it's like, and sit. Relax is maybe not the right word, but you get to sit in the music in a different way. And there are gong swells in the background. And this is why I say, like, in addition to being well produced in terms of clarity, it's those little choices that sort of announce you going into a different part. And something that ties this song together as well as the next one is this "we cut them down" phrase. He's taking a phrase, the "we cut them down," and singing it over different parts. So even though you're moving through kind of more music than a normal human can keep track of, there's something that makes it cohere. And this is why I feel this is sort of the omega of the alpha of some of those tracks on the very first album of so many left turns, but it's holding you on. It's giving you these handles and kind of guardrails. So you stay with it. And so there's just a lot of really, really great stuff, with this whole thing. I mean, there are spots when it really starts getting pretty crazy in terms of that syncopated riff that I've sung terrible versions of a couple times, and the drums fighting it. I'm like, this is starting to sound like Mahavishnu orchestra shit. Like, this is really like a little bit fusion, but the drive is there throughout. So this is to me the kind of ultimate culmination of that stuff that was on the very first album, in terms of nonstop surprises, additive meter riffs, switching the beats fighting against the music, and then refrains pulling you through all of these different twists. It's really it's really great. I mean, the fills in this song are just ridiculously excellent. And this, I think, of this kind of song, this is absolutely one of their best. And it's a real strong start to the album. Marty.
Yeah, agreed. Everything you said, I should just say ditto and go on to the next song. But basically, here on Heavy Metallurgy, we often say, especially in the album club, an album's got to start strong and end strong. Statement of intent. You got to go out guns blazing what the very essence of the album is going to be. And of course, they do that perfectly with this song. Yeah, violent lead-off track encompasses everything that Nile creatively brings to the table, of course. You got atypical scales, exacting and explosive speed, musical clarity, both in sound and the thought that goes into each riff and how they interact with each other to create the song. Very important. And, of course, something that permeates this entire album are those bends, those string bends. And, God, I just love it when bands do that. Decibel Omega does that. A bunch of bands do that now. It would start, one or two bands used to do it. Now everybody kind of does it. But it's a great, jarring, unsettling feel. Makes the song just feel a little bit wrong. The production, of course, brighter and more in your face than anything they've currently produced. Especially the vocals. I really like them way out in front of the mix. But ultimately, it's a very exciting beginning to a new chapter of the band. You got some new members in the band. And, man, it just seems like such an evolution. And having just a brighter, more vibrant production to prop these songs up. Not that they need propping, but it just really takes away this sounds flat, or this sounds, I don't like the mix. That just is removed from the equation. You're just brought into the world and sat there in front of it and just hammered for how many ever songs are on this album. Great start to a great album, in which brings us to a chapter for not being hung upside down on a stake in the underworld and made to eat feces by the four apes, which is a bit preposterous of a title. It sounds like maybe the sound the title of a upcoming Zahler book.
It's not weird though, because they had on Black Seed of Vengeance, libation unto the shades who lurk in the shadows of the temple of Anthor. So they're used to, and then Itham Balak had, like, the song titles on here are ridiculous.
Anthor, isn't that He-Man? I don't remember.
I don't remember. So I do want to say Zach Jeter is also in a band called Okoth, or Okoth, or I think that's how you're saying it. They're on Everlasting Spew. And they sound similar a little bit to Nile, so he's also another band that's fantastic. So highly recommend checking them out. So this song was their single, and I remember when I first heard it, when I saw the song title, I was like, okay, well, that's just Nile. When I first heard it, the thing that kind of drove me crazy about it is that you could hear him just straight up saying feces, like, throughout the whole entire song, and it seemed a little bit goofy when I first heard that. I was like, okay, this kind of removes, like, the brutalness of it. There's, like, a kind of a goofier aspect to this song, but I got over it pretty quickly after that. Like, I was not a fan of that just for that reason, but after listening to this, like 17 times, I think this is by far the most listened album of the year for me, in regards to everything I've listened to. I've definitely listened to this more than any other album. I'm so in love with this song now. Like, it's fun, and it's got the just fast singing, like that chorus, and then you hear, like, then feces is so pronounced. It just works. It just sounds good. Like, it is by far one of the more I would say lighthearted songs on this album for that reason, but it's still heavy. It's still got that fast and aggression. The drumming is incredible. I love the vocals on here. And it is a little bit, is this one of the shorter songs? Yeah, it is one of the shorter songs on the album. So, I mean, it's quick. It's not like a dedicated listen, but I do like it. It goes well with the album now. At first, I kind of didn't think that it belonged here, but now that I've listened to it several times, like, it's definitely, I don't have any issues with that anymore. Like, I don't even hear, like, the feces part. It doesn't even bother me anymore. For some reason, that just really struck a nerve with me when I first heard it. But now that I have it, like, in full with the whole entire album, I like the song. I think that my favorite part about it is that it just the vocals and just the high screams on this are so good on this song. Yeah, just they sound so phenomenal. And I just, that's probably one of my favorite parts of this album. So yeah, it's a great song. I think as far as, like, being one of my favorite songs, it wasn't in the beginning, but I think it's probably one of my favorites now that I've, like, given it an open mind. But yeah, just that feces part, I was like, what? All right, come on.
All right, Zahler.
So, chapter for not being hung upside down on a stake in the underworld and made to eat feces by the four apes is a bit of a heavy metal challenge, like the band name Paracoccidio Idomycosis Proctitis Sarcomucosis. So if you happen to follow that, Mexican gore grind, gore noise band. They gave us gore grind. This song is great. This for me is the 13th best song in their entire catalog. I have a top 20. I have all of their albums ordered, and my top 25 favorite songs by the band on Rate Your Music. I very much like ranking things and making lists. And for me, this is a little bit similar in terms of the kind of energy with flow and all the surprising left turns and additive meter hooks as the first one, except I think it's better. So I feel they gave you the statement of intent, and that first one has more kind of phenomenal drumming. So there's that, like, I think that opens up in that way. And also the very beginning of that cut, there's a reason why I think this order, even though this to me is the better version of the previous song, or a better kind of tune in a similar vein, the previous one has something that commences an album, and more so than this one does. But this is great. As Melanie said, those high screams are phenomenal. There are a couple of them that almost remind me of some of the wacky shit that Mike Patton was doing in Mr. Bungle with yeah, like some of it like really kind of edgy and all of that sort of stuff. But like the previous one, I feel you get a lot of shifting parts and different tags that elongate it, because there's, so at like 31 seconds there's a banana that kind of feels like a 3/4 thrash lick, and and however long they're going to elongate it, you don't know. And it's and that's some of the surprise and some of where I think they've grown and make these really aggressive tracks better now. Like I think that the first one is a top-notch one for them, and I think this is, as I said, the 13th best song in their entire catalog. And if there were ever a word that were meant to be said in Carl Sanders' guttural, it is definitely excrement. Way to go. And yeah, in terms of lighthearted, how can you not relish the metal of monkeys claw your face, monkeys rend your limbs, all of that sort of bananas monkey happening, monkey assault. This is top tier metal imagery. So this is a reason why it shouldn't all be, even though Carl's gutturals are my favorite of the voices. I want to picture those monkeys clawing the flesh, monkeys rend your skin, and doing all their simian shenanigans. So this is just a burner. And that, like that, I note it sort of like the right hand. And I remember there's a term that I used to hear, maybe a lot in reference to Slayer, in terms of the flying wrist. And I don't hear people using this term. I just hear tremolo and all this sort of stuff. But I feel something that Nile is doing better than almost any death metal band out there is capturing the sound of the right hand and like the pick attack. And that's something, obviously John Schaefer has made some bad choices in his life, but one of the good choices he made was the way he records the right hand. Yeah. You hear those chugs, and that's such an element of the Iced Earth and Demons and Wizards sound. And listening to the right hands here, I mean, you can't believe humans are going this fast. And at the 344 mark, the right hand action on that, it just sounds like they're out there somehow whittling steel. I don't even know.
That's one thing about this album. They do like this palm muted like tremolo picking. It's so clear. It's so cool because no one ever does that. And I'm like, oh my God, my hands are too enormous. I'm like, can I do that? I don't think I can. It's a technique that'd be hard to master, and they just crush it on this record.
And you both play guitar, and I only play it terribly enough to show someone else a riff. But at some point I heard him talking about technique, where instead of, because it's obviously like unrelenting, like how many of these songs would just be an endurance war to play, where instead of going kind of accenting on the 4, he accents on the 8 in terms of the alternate picking every 8, so that speed can maintain that sort of clarity, but it also gives a little bit of a different groove, but facilitates human beings being able to play this. Again, I'm not a guitarist. I just heard about it where he just said like it just sounded like a little bit more of a relaxed attack that facilitates playing this music that is constantly at the bleeding edge of what a human being could possibly play. But this song is fun. It's just a fun tune. It's badass. The imagery is great. The thrash licks, all of the additive meter stuff where they extend. Those higher screams that Melanie mentioned are great. There's one scream in here at 121, and I don't know if this hit your ears, and it feels cut in, and it's cool. It does, because I don't feel like the attack of the singer. I feel almost the attack of an edit. It's it almost seems like, you know, the one I'm talking.
Oh yeah.
And like it's a very cool effect, and I mean, there's
kind of like the David Vincent type.
Yeah,
it's kind of the same thing.
But it kind of, the moment it begins, it seems fully realized, as opposed to you hear anything prior to it. So it's a very cool sound, and again, this is like a very nice production choice. That isn't just clarity. It's like, let's kind of hard cut in this scream, and it's a great accent. So fantastic tune. I mean, I think one of the best things they've ever done in terms of this sort of joyful pummeling, moving around through parts, extending the meters, and a real highlight. I understand why this was one of the singles, because I was, after Vile Nilotic Rites, I was a little less excited about the next one, and then I heard this, I'm like, holy crap, that is innovative and fun and interesting, and the humor aspect of it I found appealing kind of right away.
Yeah, that scream, it like cuts right through you too. Like it's almost like shocking at first, because you kind of don't expect it when you're first about to hear it. So I'm imagining hearing that live with the crowd is going to be amazing. Like, you know that people are just going to scream that at the top of their lungs. So yeah, I agree. Like, there are so many things about this song that make me feel like there's a little bit of a thrashier element to it that I've not necessarily heard in past Nile albums. So I like that variation that they brought to this, although without sounding like a full-blown thrash album. But there are like the way how he does some of the guitar, like just the time signature that's in, like just the way that there's certain like way he's picking and stuff like that. Like, it sounds a little bit thrashier than most Nile songs have sounded in the past.
That main lick feels like kind of like a 3/4, the banana, banana, banana.
Yeah.
That feels like almost like a seek and destroy or something, but it's played in this way that's not quite normal, because it's this cycled in this 3/4, and then there's the that extra tag that's added on, and so it isn't thrash, but there is the root of thrash. It's kind of old.
The tone on this is incredible too. Like, just the guitar tone, the whole album, the guitar tone just is so good. Like, there's a crunchiness to it that's just so phenomenal.
Well, I agree again. This album has a ton to say, and this song, they say a lot within this is the shortest song on the album. They say a lot within the parameters of this track. Very manic sounding at first, takes a few spins to get through it. Chaotic sounding breaks in the rhythm, but even though these transitions seem at the edge of sanity, the musicianship and the way they composed everything, it makes perfect sense due to the elevated skill behind it. Of course, it just feels completely manic. And at the end of this track, I just felt like I was hit by a cement truck full of flaming monkey feces. I guess I don't know, but you know, I see why they picked it as the lead off track. Because it's the shortest. You're going to make a video. You don't want to put all the graphics and money into a 9-minute long song that no one's going to play anyway. Of course, no one plays these videos anyway. It's just a point of promotion and marketing. But fantastic song. It's crazy, but somehow they keep it all together. To Strike with Secret Fang. It's a shorty.
Yeah, no, this is a short song. I wrote pretty much still brutal in your face, and it has a little bit more melodic style of guitars on here that I really enjoyed.
Kind of black metal influence at times.
Yeah, it did have a little bit of a darker sound to it. The drumming again is a standout on this song. Again, I mean, it's only just a little under 2 minutes, but it's honestly, like, for such a short track, it's a very good transition lead into the next song, but it also stands out on its own as well. So yeah, I mean, I didn't really write too much because it was such a short track, but just the guitars sounded a little bit more melodic on this, and I enjoyed that part while still also keeping that brutal, and like in your face sound that they start off the album with.
Yeah. So I think the song is pretty good. In light of the two previous ones, it's not very substantial. It's I think this is a Brian Kingsland composition, and I say that I think all the tracks are co-written by Callias, and considering his performance, this is fact whether he contributed a single riff or not. The amount of music he's contributing, and I'm sure he's involved with arranging. I think it's pretty good. It's that, I mean, I think all three of us are going to say, yeah, there's a Norwegian black metal lick in there. That's that rising lick. And I enjoy this tune. It's following on two top level, particularly the previous one, insane Carl Sanders compositions. And it's pretty straight in terms of meter and stuff like that. At the same time, there's a directness to it that is kind of a nice end to this section of the album. The wrists, the chugs on this, it just sounds like an army of advancing. I don't know how many guitars Nile is putting down in the studio in terms of that rhythm track. I don't know if that's 4. I don't know if that's 6. I wouldn't be surprised if it were 8. There's certainly a point where you keep adding, and it's just gonna muddy up your sound and not actually sound like more. And if they're all have the same tone, it's not necessarily gonna sound like more anyways. But I think this song is pretty good. I definitely have less to say about this one, and I think it's just kind of serving in this spot. With music that is this demanding of your attention and has this much stuff going on, to have, like, I would be fine if this album just went straight into the next song and had the total color change. But I also get the idea of giving you something more direct and accessible. I think Dallas Toller Wade, in terms of the compositions he contributed to Nile, he was very much contributing a lot of their best material. And he's an excellent riff writer with a different voice than Carl's. And when I look at my top 25 songs by Nile, maybe a third of those are Dallas Toller Wade compositions or co-written by him. And the Kingsland stuff on the previous album, on this one, I like less than Carl's stuff. And this one is pretty good. It's fun. It's kind of short, and I understand why it's here. But the two previous tracks are completely on a different level for me.
Yeah. Well, the thing I thought was cool, it's a 1:58 long song. The 45-second mark, we get the first experience with a lofty atmospheric guitar riff, feels slightly black metal influenced. And then it flows into a more melodic moment with a solo, and then goes back to the atmospheric riff again. But in under 2 minutes long, they've crammed a lot of feeling into the piece. And because of it, I'm not feeling shorted by it. It feels like a complete song when it ends. It doesn't feel like a fragment. You know what I mean? I felt there was a beginning, a middle, and an end to it. I thought it was well done. I mean, I don't really see the point of a 1:58 long song in the middle of such, monstrous tracks, but it offers up a bit more melody, more obvious melody, I should say, than a lot of these other songs do. So I think it serves its purpose on the album. Again, I'm a guy, when I listen to an album, when we do these, I have to break down and look at tracks, and I like just taking a record from start to finish. If there's a flow and holds my attention, it's a good album. So, and this, in fact, I didn't even really realize it was a fragment until I started sitting down and looking. It just felt like it was like maybe the intro piece to the next song. I don't know, but picking it apart individually, I think it's a well done, well composed, short song, and it fits within the flow of the album. And that brings us to my least favorite track on here, Nakata 2, Enter the Golden Age.
Really?
But I'm not saying I'm not saying it's a throwaway track. I'm just saying out of all of them, it's the one that I was least gravitated towards.
Yeah,
you're going to
be assaulted. You're going to be, be doubly assaulted for that absolutely bananas statement. But
I have my opinions.
It is your turn. I will insult and deride Marty's comment.
I'm used to it.
Yep.
I felt my heart break just a tiny bit there. I was a little bit surprised by that statement.
And I don't mean the song sucks. Believe me, it's awesome. But if I have to pick one on the album, this anyway.
This is my favorite track on the album. I'll just say that. The element that was added to this, which obviously is the women's vocals on this, were a surprise. It was not something I expected. And it was a welcoming surprise because when I first heard it, I instantly was like, oh, this sounds phenomenal. And there's almost like I don't want to say like a prog element to it, because whenever I say that, people assume that I'm going full blown, like they're going full blown atheist or something like that.
Right.
Like it's definitely more of like a progressive style that they've added into this. Like they've added different elements into their albums throughout the years, and that have always been a little bit different. And like, you know, the gongs on here that we've already heard and stuff like that. But this like women's vocals, and I can't remember her name. I know that there's two of them on here. Carl. Yeah, Carl posted a picture with them on Facebook. I remember when they were recording. He said one of them was Jasmine, the other one was Tiffany. I don't remember who was on this this track, but I love it. Like, I just think it's so got like a really creepy like atmosphere to it, and it almost has like a very like jamming groove style too within it. It's a little bit a slower tempo, just a little bit slower tempo than the last previous songs. And I think that it starts to bring more of that technicality into this album, a little bit more of that like progressiveness that they're trying to add in here, of not just writing brutal songs by adding that into here. So this was my favorite song immediately when I first heard it. I love the element. And honest, like the vocalists, the women vocalists remind me a little bit of like from those Pink Floyd days. Like obviously it doesn't sound anything like Pink Floyd, but that's what it just reminded me of.
Me
like,
too.
With that.
The first thing I felt was, you know, Dark Side of the Moon and that stuff.
Yeah, and I actually even looked her up because I was like, wait a minute now. Like that sounds a little bit similar. Like, is that the same vocals? Because I wouldn't be surprised by any means if Carl had did that, because he definitely is a fan of you know, those classic eras of music. But I went to look. I was going to pull out and see who the vocalist was. But yeah, that's my favorite song. I think it's great. It's different. It adds a layer to like a brutal technical death metal album that you don't expect. And I think like it just creates, like I said, like that creativeness that this album has. So yeah, I love the song. I don't know, but I'm interested to hear what you have to say, Marty. But I'll let you go first. Zahler, I'm sure you have.
I was reading over my notes, and my complaint is at the beginning of the song, but we'll get there.
Oh, the beginning of the song, it's different, but I think it's a build up. It's definitely a build up. That's for sure.
All right, Craig.
So I think this song is excellent. In their catalog, I would put it as their 9th best song, and it's my second favorite on this album. And it's I agree with everything that Melanie said. I feel this is the first time where there's a substantial period where Nile is rocking like in the pocket, and kind of about a minute 18 where they're held chords and it's like rolling double bass, and the pocket is deeper. And considering the shit that happened for the first 3 tracks, which is like varying degrees of like unrelenting assaults and left turns and action and surprise, it really is that pocket hits all that much harder insofar as like, oh, we can now kind of sink into it. And so they're really nice held chords in that section, and alternating the Fry voice, which I think the Zach Jeter voice, and Carl's gutturals. And then and this is one of the things where it feels like, and you know, obviously they're recording it in different continents, but you just feel the synergy of the band when it gets into the unite the two lands, and it gets into that whole section with the giant drum fill transition, and then like a different version, a tremolo version of the previous riff. So you're getting like the different variations, and these are things that just help like kind of carry you forward through all of the different parts. And then there's a lovely little drum detail that this was something like I'm a headphones guy mostly. I live in New York, so that's a good way to listen to things and not have a lot of interruptions. And there's just something to point out for me, like from the drummer perspective, where there's this climbing lick at 2.5 minutes in this song. And Callias is doing this thing that I probably have heard it elsewhere before, but I can't think of anywhere else, where he's doing these blasts and then he puts in these microscopic rests. So it's something, and I don't know if it's a 16th note or a 32nd, but it's like this little pause of the, and it just allows him to just kind of reattack again and again. And it's like, this is the kind of stuff where there's a little bit of a question if there were just guys waiting outside George Callias' home that are like, we're going to kill you after you finish recording this album, so get it all down now. Every idea you can possibly come up with, put it on here, because I'm listening to this sort of stuff, and like, who's going to think to put in these little microscopic rests there? It's brilliant. And then there are kind of all these really good stop starts with There Is a Promised Land Waiting for Us. The solo at 3.5 minutes over the deep pocket riff is great, really, really soulful, probably the best solo on the album. And then it gets into that breakdown of a different, Lombardo is such a pivotal figure in drumming history for this genre, and really just all rock drumming. Oh, yeah. So when someone is playing the ride, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, it just snap into kind of a Slayer mindset. And it's when it gets into that breakdown, it's just, this is the first time in the album where I think there's like sustained room to headbang. Like this, this just seems like something that if you see this live, this is when people are losing their shit, because there's just the pocket to headbang after whatever it was, like 12 minutes of bewildering assault. And then we get we've got to cleanse the black earth. Like that whole thing is incredible. All of that stuff. And then the Fry voice takes that refrain and extends it in terms of the whole, like, we've got to cleanse the black earth, the whatever wiped clean, and joining it all together. And then the bring about the golden age, all of that stuff is just incredible. And I mean, like, I had the same association that Melanie did, which was just thinking of, Roger Waters and Pink Floyd and David Gilmour and these sorts of vocals in that context. But with the vibrato, and they're also changing pitches as they come in each different time, it just sold to me, even though I had that other association. It's like, yeah, this is Egyptian. Like, there's a pyramid. It's he's got a couple of Cleopatras back there, and that's how it's going down. And it is really, really a superb cut. As I said, like, this is, you're like eight, this many albums into their career, and the first time I heard this, I was just like, forever include these women vocals in your music. Or like, I didn't by the time at the end of the song, it's the kind of thing that can give that gives me chills, and it just adds another color. And obviously this is a band that has spent sometimes too much time for me in the past with the interludes and the exotic instrumentation and all that sort of stuff. I'm like, well, here we're just getting it in the song, and in the most
nice.
Yeah, and the most headbanging aspect of the song. So that that to me is the ideal place to land this stuff. And I understand the function of the other things, and I enjoy some of those to varying degrees. But there's no interlude in their catalog that to me is as good as this song, or like anywhere near this section, which has that flavor. So, hats off. And I really, really hope they continue to do this, because this is an incredibly good addition. And I think a daring, a risky choice. If I, hearing about this ahead of time, I would not have thought that this would have been one of the highlight choices of this album, and one of the most interesting, if not the single most interesting really new feeling idea I heard in metal this year. It is this. Like, obviously you get something like whatever Blood Incantation mixing in their Floyd and like overtly proggy and doing all that sort of stuff, but a band like Nile delivering headbanging metal tracks that are really headbanging throughout and integrating that into the stuff where they're the climactic metal moments. That's what I would rather hear when I'm listening to metal. Not that I enjoy that Blood Incantation album, but I don't enjoy it as much as this album. And that's real hats off. As I said, like this is this is pretty far into their catalog for me to like. Here's I think the 9th best song they've ever written, but only the 2nd best song on this album. So hats off. So let's hear your thoughts on this album, Mr. Ritkinen.
My thoughts, I'll tell you straight up, it's all because of a 25-second part of the song.
Okay.
That's it. And I felt going through this, it's the one part of this whole album that kind of takes me out of the spell because it just doesn't sit with the rest of the album. And it's that, first song on the album where the transition doesn't feel exactly right to me. It's a beautifully crafted intro, full of Middle Eastern scales meets slower Morbid Angel. You have the gong swells going on for atmosphere and, cinematic hugeness, the feeling of something bigger to come. Then at the 25-second mark, they abandon the atmosphere for more of a fast and sharp thrash riff. It's totally anticlimactic. Like, oh, we're going into someplace huge. You can see the curtain coming up and the scene unfolding in cinema. And then they go to a thrash riff. I'm like, oh, okay. It flows in the concept, but the feel is noticeably downgraded here for me, where even though all the stuff leading up to this point is just a hammering of, manic, strange, but everything flows. There's a flow to it. Here is just simply an awesome intro followed by an awesome thrash riff, but the two don't feel like they sit in the same song.
Okay.
That's my complaint. Cut that intro and the track works perfectly for me. I really like the gang yells, but with the woman choir later in the track, it's just weird how they would introduce a track with all that pomp and atmosphere and never go back and capitalize on it. It's like they had this chunk of an idea, let's tack it on here, and it feels like an incomplete opportunity.
Okay.
Missed opportunity. So that's the only thing on this album that made me go, I don't like that transition. Does the song suck? No. Does the riff suck? No. They just didn't sit on the same line together for me. But that leads us to the Pentagram of Nephren-Ka. It's an instrumental. Mel.
I mean, it's a good track.
Pretty good.
I don't know. I didn't really write any notes about this, probably because it was instrumental. I did for other ones, but no, it's a good track. I mean, it's kind of the like breather a little bit on this album. So there's that, which I didn't really feel like the album needed that at all. I don't feel like, but I also don't feel like it's a filler either. I mean, it belongs here. It's a good track. If they left it off, I wouldn't have been angry, but at the same time, indifferent. It's hard to have like such a strong opinion when it really just feels like a breather, kind of a transitional into what I feel is like a different element to the album after this song. Like we're starting to get into like different sounds and a little bit more variances. So yeah, but it's a good track.
Okay, Craig.
Yeah, I mean this is an interlude. I think if it were a meal, this is the sorbet and the dessert is coming. It's nice to give the listener's ears a rest when music is this punishing and this busy. And also, I think there's the reality of that the previous song is so amazingly grooved and headbanging that going into, even if they launch straight into a burner or a doom, like I'm not sure that's such kind of a conclusive moment. Like a lot of albums have no moments as good as the last section of the previous song. And so I understand the purpose it serves. I mentioned Necros Christos is, one of my like 5 favorite death metal bands of all time. Those albums are totally loaded with these things in between. And I feel they serve the purpose of making the downbeat of the next song hit harder and allow your ears to rest so it's not wall-to-wall buzzing guitar. So it's fine. I listened somewhere to Carl Sanders explain the Pentagram, which is essentially some kind of chord or something he's invented. And let's say this went way, way, way over my head.
Yeah.
This is in terms of the music theory and his invented chord and the 11th and all of this stuff that he was talking about. I said, yeah, you keep exploring this sort of stuff. Yes. Do whatever drives you. It was beyond my comprehension.
Yeah, there was the thing about the vinyl record. I don't know, the CD might have this too. Is that he wrote little liner notes on each song, or like basically like what's behind it.
Yeah, they are microscopic on the.
Yeah, I mean they're pretty bad on this too. Yeah, but he says on here the purpose and the intention behind this was it's just an instrumental piece to serve as like an interlude, to offer a quiet moment of exotic tomb-like serenity. So it is like to have like a bit of a rest. Yes. And then basically the ancient mystery amidst the chaos and destruction of the rest of the Underworld album. So that I like that he writes that. He did not talk about his pentagrammatonia riff or anything like that. Oh, actually, no, he does. He does go into full detail about that on here. But interesting. I'll have to read about that more. He does go.
If I can't play it while wearing mittens, I'm not interested.
Yeah, he does. There's a whole paragraph, the whole entire thing about this. That's interesting. Okay, I'll have to read that now. I immediately ignored these inner sheets because the font is so little. But when I started looking further into this and like reading the lyrics and stuff, especially the Feces song, because I was interested to hear what he was saying on that, I noticed that there was these little liner notes about each song. So I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
One brief aside. You brought up the album. Like, I'm a believer in if the thing was recorded digitally, I want it on CD. If the album is longer than 40 minutes, I want it on CD. I'm much more interested in just the best sounding experience. But this was one where I thought about the vinyl because, hats off. Every song has its own original art. This is one of the best Nile covers ever.
That's cool.
If not the best one. I always like the hung upside down art with the monkeys rending flesh, particularly inspired. But this is not like, to me, this is a real incentive. If there are people who grew up in a different generation, I mean, I'm like living in a home surrounded by a music collection that breathes more air than I do. But for people who grew up in a different generation and the physical product doesn't mean as much, Nile is really giving you some incentives. And this is actually an incentive like I thought about for the first time in kind of forever, getting a vinyl, even though I know I'm going to listen to this on CD, because it's like, oh, wow, there are really nice pieces of art for everything. So I think that was a class act. And I assume this is something Carl wanted to do, and Napalm Records, and I think this is their first one there, backed his play. So it's great that this thing is loaded with extra art. Like if every metal album came with a nice piece of original art for each song, cool. I would be happy. That's very, very cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I feel kind of cheated now because the vinyl does not have that. It just has this gatefold.
They should have done a booklet. They should have done a booklet with it.
And then the back, and that's it. Because the vinyl, I just have the classic black vinyl, but the inner sheets are, No, so now I'm probably going to buy the CD because I do have I have every Nile CD already, but I just recently started getting their vinyl. So now I'm probably going to get the CD just for the extra artwork.
Yeah, no, they're really cool pieces. This artist is, and I think they worked with him before, but this is, I like Annihilation of the Wicked is cool, but this to me looks like a well manipulated photo, whereas this looks like. Yeah. Hand painted, and it's probably digitally painted, but it's painted illustration style. And this is one of my favorite covers by them. Maybe I have them all here. This is probably my favorite cover by them. And there are a number of other pieces of art inside. In Their Darkened Shrines is a cool one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that one.
All right.
I
well,
like Black Seas of Vengeance too.
Oh, they're yeah.
Yeah, that's a cool one too.
Yeah, the instrumental, short, moody piece, classical guitar playing in an atypical mode. Great reset by adding beauty before being suffocated by the beast, which is coming.
Mm.
Which is the next song is one of my favorites on here.
Yep.
Overlords of the Black Earth.
Yeah,
Melanie.
I have this as one of my favorites too. Again, a little bit more of a creepier, darker atmosphere on this song. Definitely has like that chaos of underworld feel. Definitely feels like we're now in the pits of hell with this song. And then of course the women vocals are back, and they're another shining moment on this album. It's just a very brutal. It's also a very technical song. It's definitely a track that I had to grow on me a little bit. It kind of felt like after that breather of a slower, shorter song, it kind of felt like I made a little bit of exhaustion, like a little bit of a blended in song on this album, because of what you're just assaulted with at the very beginning. But the more I listen to it, this is definitely one of my favorite songs as well. But I like that more of that like darker style that they added into this. And again, I feel like this is where the album starts to really, really drag you through, like just that the overall tone of this, of like being in that underworld, just in hell, basically. So yeah, but again, I love the women's vocals on this. This is like definitely just the favorite part of my album, of this album, are those vocals that they've added in here.
This is my least favorite song on the album. This is kind of the only one I wish weren't on here. I feel Marty and I have talked about this, and perhaps Melanie will attack us both. I feel Satan's Fall is a disaster.
Me too.
Melissa would be one of my favorite metal albums of all time, if not for that song, which I feel is a casserole of riffs that don't go together. And the introduction of each new riff in that is almost like half of the time, if not more than that, they completely stop the momentum of the song to introduce a new riff, each one worse than the previous, till eventually you land in the abysmal nadir of the Merciful Fate catalog, which is that whatever he's saying there, low point in the in the entire catalog. So this song is better. I think this song is okay. I feel this one more than anything else on this album, and more than any, like, there was a little bit of this on the last album where I feel this is a kind of a riff reservoir, like this, or this is where they were just ideas upon ideas upon ideas were piled on it. Unfortunately, kind of the landing idea, or one I feel it goes to a lot, is this. There's a really dissonant lick in here, and
there's an ascending riff that's really fucking cool.
That lick, that one is pretty cool. There's a winding proggy lick, and when the women sing the spirits of fire crossover, like that whole part is pretty cool. But I mean, I have it noted here at 326, but it happens throughout this thing. There's this really dissonant, like sludge, like kind of oscillating thing, and I just don't like the sound of it in general. I'm not a big fan of dissonance in death metal. I say this acknowledging I like Hate Eternal, and Morbid Angel is my second favorite death metal band of all time, and both of, like, there's dissonance in both of those. But when I listen to something like Ulcerate, I'm like, go wipe your nose, and it's just really like runny nose, backwash kind of. It's not my thing. And Ulcerated, they're phenomenal musicians. And the new one I don't care for. But the previous one, I was like, maybe I'm going to get into this band, but I don't really care for the new one. But that sort of dissonance, that lick could be, and like you slow it down, you could just stick that in a sludge song. So unfortunately, what I feel is the most memorable and landing idea of it is definitely my least favorite lick on the album. But I feel this is one of these things, like a bit of the Satan's Fall, where the lack of an identity and a spirit and a mood that consistently carries you through the song, there's an overcompensation with the abundance of ideas. And it has a ton of ideas. There's as much music going on in this song. Like, the last Obituary album did not have as many ideas as this song. There are a lot of ideas here. And I feel that's what it is. This is just the one where I feel it is it's a storehouse of riffs. It's not bad. I just don't really get that much of it. And there are a bunch of there's a hammer-on riff in there where I almost feel like, and I don't know the composition process other than I know in general for Nile. I know in general he starts with the lyrics first, but there's this longer hammer-on lick where I almost feel like the note choices and chords are randomly chosen. Like there's not a direction to it. And I don't know, do you guys remember there's a band called Internecine?
Yeah, Jared Anderson's
band. Some of that album I liked. Some of it, and obviously it's sort of related to Hate Eternal and what they were doing.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, rest in peace. And the best live Morbid Angel shows I saw actually were with.
I saw them once with him at the Motorhead Today's the Day tour.
Yeah. And but sometimes like the songs on that album that I enjoy. The ones that I didn't enjoy, it just felt like a whole lot of activity and almost like the notes are randomly chosen and there's not a directionality to the riffs. There's just a lot of action. And that's what I feel about this song. This is one where I think if this song were not on the album, like I might already kind of rank this as number one. But this one, partially because like I think it is just a bunch of ideas, but also because it's a lot. It's my least favorite lick, but there's so much going on. It's not like it's just sort of a simpler doom eater song or a shorter cut. It's a substantial cut that has so much going on that it's something where I want to spend that energy and focus on all these other better cuts. And the album completely redeems itself. And I don't think this is bad, but I just do think it doesn't feel like it coheres to me as a song in terms of a song that has a unifying mood or directionality. Some of those riffs seem like pure improvisation, and that can yield cool stuff. I'm a fan of John Coltrane and I like Neil Young, and I listen to tons of both of those guys improvising forever, but not all of it lands. And to me, this has that feel. Again, I don't know that any of it was done in that way, but the lack of directionality and the overabundance of parts just make it feel like just not realized in the way that every other song on this album feels just kind of realized and landed.
Well, this is one of the favorites of mine on the album. The mental pictures it puts in, that's part of it. The world building thing. Great track, intense riffs that ascend both in feel and in the note runs. It feels like I was being ripped apart while being pulled into the sky by a tornado. So you can start hearing riffs that put you in that mental space. It's always a good sign. Really like the bass tone on here. It stands out on this track, maybe more so than most of the album, showcasing Dan's excellent performance. More thrashy riff ideas erode into dissonant chords just before the 2-minute 5-second mark, where a female lead choir is augmented by a phaser effect to perfectly match the off-center string bends beneath them. I love, like I said, I'm a sucker for that. It just gives you that feeling of sickness in your gut. And then you got that a phaser effect over the choir, the woman's choir. The whole thing is just so great. It's great.
His bends are particularly good, and when I hear that stuff, I do wonder if he's got that scalloped fretboard, and the two of you would know more than I would. I haven't seen them live in a long time, and I haven't seen much live footage of them, or particularly good live footage to be able to tell if it's the scallop board. But some of that bend I feel is like comes of like that. It feels like squeezing the neck, but it could just be a normal bend.
Well, you just pull. I mean, while you're picking, you're pulling the strings down. Of course, it could be because I did watch a thing where he was showing off some guitars in like a Gear Masters type of video.
Yeah.
And he's like the entire fretboard scaled or scalloped.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know.
Those are hard to play.
I don't know. I've never touched one.
Yeah, it's
hard to play.
You have to have such a gentle touch to not have all of these licks like semitones off.
Yes.
The
intonation is so hard on that. Yeah.
It's like the fretless. It's like kind of like a different version of fretless in terms of like your ear needs to be there and your touch needs to be there for this all not to be off.
Yeah. But yeah, that whole middle part with the ladies singing and the bending riffs, it's very hellish feeling. And it's really cool how they worked it into the middle of the song, and it fits for me. And then they go back to the ascending thrash riffs and chaotic chord hits until the end. The song rules. It's just, yeah, there might be a little riff salad going on, but the spots that hit for me are the ones that really make that track worthwhile every time I circle back around to it. And another favorite of mine is coming up next, Under the Curse of the One God.
Yes.
Melanie.
Oh, man. This song is so good. It is so fast. Like, that just aggression, that speed comes in right away with it. And just George's drumming on this is phenomenal. Like, just straight up bright shining star on this song is his drumming on this. But it is just, it reminded me a little bit of Older Nile. It had a little bit more of that Older Nile feel to it, which I feel like didn't happen as much on this album. Definitely there's a little bit more uniqueness here where I didn't hear as much of Older Nile, but this track specifically made me feel like I was listening to something from Black Seas of Vengeance. Like it had that feel to it. And just like it really stands out with the three guitars and the drumming. It's just a very brutal. This is probably one of the more brutal songs on the album, in regards to just that brutality with how it starts. But yeah, this is one of my favorite tracks. And just the overall theme of this song is very dark and in depth. If you get the physical release, they goes into extreme detail about just essentially Egyptian religion and Christianity and all these things. And like you almost like live that while you're listening to the song after reading those themes with that. So, but yeah, this is probably, I honestly, it's probably tied for one of my favorite songs on the album. And it's so, I feel like it's so buried in the album too. Cause like, what is this, the 7th track?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at this point, like you're invested if you've gotten this far, and I kind of worry that it will get buried. But then they made a visualization video with it. I think this was the 2nd single that they released, and very cool. Go watch that video. So I'm glad that they did that because now people know this song. I was a little bit worried that since it's so far into the album, that it would kind of go like under the radar as being one of the Nile songs that people don't know too much. So yeah, I love the song. It's definitely one of my favorites. Again, just the way it starts, like it just pummels you with how that speed that he has, and just the drumming. It's like he's an octopus. I don't know how he does it. I'm not a drummer. Don't know. I'm exhausted listening to it. I've always envied anybody that can play like that.
Craig.
Yeah, I'm totally back on board when this song comes in, and it does kind of the first chunk of it, I think, does continue a little bit the riff salad of the previous. It's really a lot of ideas coming at you, and then it lands with the they do nothing of the prophet yet to come, and the and that like I think my guess is he was annoyed at the beginning, Carl, with the band in terms of the Morbid Angel comparisons, which for the most part I'm not hearing that much. It's so much right hand stuff.
Yeah.
He has his own unique sound. Occasionally,
that chord thing. I mean, that's very Morbid Angel. It
right.
Just is.
This is the first moment on this album where I'm thinking of Morbid Angel. So we've heard roughly 95 different riffs by the time you've gotten here, if not more. And this is the first time it kind of gets into that. Into that spot. Vocals are really, really nice in that one. I also feel, in terms of what Melanie was saying in the interpretations, I feel there's probably political and religious, like modern political and religious interpretations to be taken from it. And the Under the Curse of the One God, just like the drum fill stuff underneath it is really madness. And it's nice to have the female choir recapitulating that other idea, the under the curse, and kind of carrying that part forward. And that's some of the stuff where I just sense a greater world building with this band. And again, in the context of the song, which is always my favorite place for them to do it, rather than in the interlude. That's just a bunch of other material. But it's a solid tune, and I'm completely on board with it. One thing I wonder is I always feel like that outro feels like an intro, and I wonder if it were ever at the beginning of the song, because I kind of feel like it would be a better preview of the Under the Curse refrain, and then the song begins and it goes into all that stuff, and then you land in the metal, as opposed to you're landing in the exotic stuff where there aren't any held chords as a coda. So I think the outro would be a better intro, but this is a minor quibble for a song that has me for its duration and one I enjoy.
Yeah, another favorite, and I talked about this earlier on in the evening here. One of the most, the fastest and most disorienting tracks for me on the album. They do that tremolo pick palm muting thing. God, I love that. It's just so, and they're so sharp and so in lockstep with Colias's precision blast work here. It makes it a very standout trait on the album. I wish they did it more. And then again, they're bending the strings ever so slightly while picking the notes, giving off that sickly, off-centered vibe. Gives me the permanent skank face, like, love it. Stank face, skank face. Those are two different things, aren't they? More deranged female background vocals before the ritualistic portion of the song creeps in with sitar, tribal drums, chanted vocals. It's a very interesting way to end the song, and it's so Nile. I mean, like, I'm with Zahler here. I really like the fact they're adding these elements, these cultural elements in with the music, as opposed to, okay, this ripping ass death metal song just ends, and now we're gonna, beat on a bongo and play with the sitar app on your phone for, that shit's cool, but it's way better when you unite the two and make it actually part. I mean, this has been part of Nile since the beginning, more or less, and they're really getting good at working it in. So definitely. And that brings us to track 8, Doctrine of Last Things.
Yeah, this is actually my least favorite song on the album. It's not a bad song by any means. I don't skip it. It's not a skippable song, but it feels a bit more of a filler for me on this. It definitely has this like simplistic groove to it that is a little bit different. At times it sounds a little bit like Gojira, maybe a little Pantera. And I think that might be why it kind of deterred me a little bit for like enjoying it as much as I have in the past tracks. I mean, but again, it's not a terrible song by any means. But again, I just feel like there's a little bit, this is definitely, in my opinion, a little bit more of the less technical song on the album, a little bit more of a simplistic song on the album. But it's not terrible. I just, that's pretty much what I wrote. Like, I don't love it to the point of where I have all these things to say. But again, if it's an album of like where I actually love, if there's one track on there that I haven't fully loved yet, I'll get there eventually. It's just, this might be a mood thing for me. I think after like maybe the 20th listen, it'll be high up there on me. I always do that. I always feel bad saying I don't like a song on an album because I know like 3 years down the road, I'll hear it one day and be like, oh, you know what? This actually isn't that bad. It's always just my mindset at the time of listening to it. But I would, to be honest, if they left this track off the album, I would have been okay with it.
You are incorrect, my dear.
Melanie is in fact incorrect. This is I in their catalog. I have this as their 19th best song. So this is a really good argument for death metal as a positive force. Now, obviously, there's all of this Grimmer Than Thou and.
Oh, is this song builds orphanages for school for children?
It does not. But
okay.
Like, we all listen to death metal. We're not, like you could tell from this conversation and from our programs and the stuff we do, we're not just walking around angry people. We're three people who love this kind of music and get a lot of pleasure out of it. And I think there's a joyfulness to this track. It absolutely has a different vibe. I know what Melanie's saying. This reminds me of Hate Eternal, kind of the best Hate Eternal, King of All Kings, and what's the Upon Desolate Sands. When there is just such a relishing the empowerment of death metal. And although death metal can be dark and it can have a scary mood and it can be assaultive and stuff like that, I mean, one of the things that probably unifies all the death metal I like, or let's say almost all of it, is this empowerment it gives the listener and the energy that it fills you with. And so this is the song I feel on this album that really does it. And I feel like the best Hate Eternal was consistently in that zone of giving it. And once Chris Youn got really grooved, which happened with the new tracks they recorded on that Bloodshed EP. I was like, oh my gosh, they're all of a sudden playing in the pocket. They also, I feel, had that sort of stuff. And that lick, there's the hammer on, like the that it comes in at about a minute in, and it's a pretty big color shift from the stuff that was before it and anything else that's on the rest of the album. And the little digressions at like 2:15, this is like the digressions you would get in something like King of All Kings by Hate Eternal, and the choir coming in and the dead will not return, giving a different flavor and kind of a different seriousness to something that I feel overall is pretty joyful. Like not something that not a word that I think people generally use to describe death metal, much less Nile, but I think it's there. And I'll just point out there's another spot at 3:20 in this, and this is a bit what gives me the Hate Eternal thing, because when they were on fire, particularly King of All Kings and Upon Desolate Sands, those are in the discussion for all-time great drum performances as well. Derek Roddy's performance on King of All Kings in particular. But at 3:20 in this song, this is another great instance of Callias like, no, I'm going to totally fight you with these drum fills. Sanders and Callias collide. And that's something that's happening on this album. And I just like, there's a comfort with it. And it's a great, like, this is something veteran drummers do. And I'm thinking of arguably the best drummer ever to live in rock history, Ainsley Dunbar, the stuff that he's doing with Journey when they were like a progressive jam band, like the really early pre-Steve Perry stuff, and then the stuff that he was doing on that Whitesnake album, the one with John Sykes, the self-titled, like it's just sometimes just playing across and combating and just that much personality. So really, really good. And it's a simpler song kind of overall. I think it's something more comprehensible instantly than most of the other things. And I think the tone is lighter and brighter, and I can understand why it would bump for Melanie. And certainly it is a color shift on the album, but one that I enjoy. So those are my thoughts on Doctrine of Last Things.
And ultimately, this is, where the doom stuff kind of creeps in a bit. And at this point in the album, I'm ready for that. I'm ready for that. I don't want to say change, because it feels right in the album for me, but we've been hit and dug up and hit again with, complex, perplexing riffage. It's nice to have something a little bit more grounding, more string bending here. I love it. I love that demonic and strange vibe. It picks up steam around the 1 minute mark. More female vocal accompaniment around 125. Adds more to the uniqueness of this track and the album. Exacting blast and fill work from Callias, of course. The song peaks midway with blasting before returning to the doom feel we heard at the beginning. So, they kind of bookend it with the doom. And
let me just say something about it, because you're saying doom. That lick,
that's right.
What I mean. That lick to me, because I forgot that lick to me is the second lick on this album that feels like Morbid Angel, like like that.
Yeah.
That idea is like that lurching stuff. I mean, like my favorite Morbid Angel albums are when they slowed down and put in more variety. Gateways and Domination are my favorite spot. And this feels like that sort of like lurch core, the brah, brah, brah. And then that's the theme that the women kind of recapitulate, like that, whatever that harmonic idea is when they're singing it, it's echoing that idea. But yeah, it is cool getting that deeper pocket thing, and not total doom, but I know what you're saying.
That leads us to track 9, True Gods of the Desert. Melanie, another favorite of mine. Really like this one too.
Yeah, I do really enjoy this one. It's got a little bit more slower, romping pace, as I like to say. It definitely made me do the head bob a couple times, a little bit of a stank face.
You mean skank face? Whichever.
Marty, the skank face depends on what you're doing after the show, Marty. So you need to know about
stanks. I wrote skank in my notes, but I meant stank, I think. Anyway.
Yeah. But then, of course, there's that surprise of the clean vocals, which I was thinking about this. If they had leaned in a little bit harder on the clean vocals in the past albums, I think they would have done a good job of it, because this was good. I really liked that layer, and sometimes people get thrown off by that and they immediately write off a song, especially like within death metal. But I like that element that they added to this song. It's just, I mean, it's really, like I said, it's slower. It's an interesting song. It's a little bit more unique than what we've been hearing in the past songs. Definitely, I like that a little bit more. I feel like that darker element is back now and not as bright as the previous track, which again brought me right back into it. And one of my favorite songs on the album for sure. But like I said, it definitely got me into like that, like, okay, we're back to the brutal. Like this is a song that I'm just gonna bob my head to, dance around in my office with the stank face, playing air guitar. It's just this one felt like more of a fun track for me in that regard. But yeah, I like that. I like those clean vocals. It made me feel like, wait a minute, where'd that come from? Oh, that works really well. Like that's not bad at all. That sounds phenomenal. They did a great job on that. So yeah, I love this song. It's a great song.
Yeah, this is a solid tune. This one, I just doubled it. This is Kingsland as well, in terms of the composition. And yeah, it's interesting. I think this song probably has more radical color shifts than any other song on it, because the clean vocal part, the emboldened by dust, shining the light of Ra, like that's something I could hear on a Borknagar album, and I'm a Borknagar fan. That is not an insult. Those harmonies are super rich. And that part is really, really nice. And this is going to sound briefly like an insult, but I don't mean it as that. So I'm not a Pantera guy. I never liked that stuff. And I don't like groove metal, let's say, at all. Maybe the first Machine Head album would get in the classification of not shit, but it just never appealed to me. The concept of groove metal, the idea of essentially slower thrash, appealed to me. I think it's pretty much the vocals in that genre and the tough guy posturing that turned me off. And so this, I feel this kind of main lick, the brana, could be a dime bag lick. There's that really heavy verse lick, which it could be a dime bag lick. You could also, Amon Amarth's rowing pit could come on over and start rowing to that lick. It really is cool. So I think it's sort of one. It's got a lot of swagger. It's also like a little bit Judas Priest touch of evil. So it's got a lot of swagger and personality. And a lot of my favorite riffs I'll sort of look at in terms of swagger. So it's a cool lick, really heavy, and but then eventually you get to the clean vocal kind of chorus idea, and this is really kind of heavenly ascension. So there's a big sweep in this song, and it's very easy to see the pits going for this one, because the changes, it's not like some of the changes in the first two songs, which are like scientists need to decipher. This is stuff where you're like, they're dropping into that really grooved like dropping into that heavy thing, and then the pit can go and it's in that space, and then the landing that sort of ascended part with the harmonies is very nice. So I enjoy this tune. This is a good song.
Yeah, good song for sure. Middle Eastern phrasing returns on this one.
Yeah.
Mighty hook-laden intro to the song, which returns later in the track to give the listener that much-needed continuity. Love the backing and clean vocals. The clean vocals are really cool on this part, on this song. As to the cultural nature of what this band does. This one strikes me as more of a patient, deep cut on the album. But the reoccurring hook and overall construction of the song is so advanced and solid, it's hard not to eventually fall under its spell. And what I would say, if we're closing this right now, I really like albums and songs that take me on a journey that I don't know where I'm going. I mean, you can take me to the deep heart of the pyramid, but be sure to leave me some breadcrumbs on how to get out. And that's what Nile does. They take me on a place I'm like, I don't know where this song is going, but somehow Carl and crew navigate it back into a spot where they either recall some things. It's just excellent composition, and I like being led back to maybe where I started sometimes on these long winding journeys. But leads us to track 10, The Underworld Awaits Us All, title track of the album. Slowest track on the album. Melanie.
Yep. Yeah. This one, I'm trying to read my notes now, has a bit of a, I heard it for a brief second. I'm not going to say it sounds exactly like kind of a creeping death riff to it.
I have that written in my note. That intro.
Okay.
The intro. Yeah. Yeah. It's not exactly the same, but the intro definitely is that. I have that written down as well.
Yeah, there's definitely that ambience here on this song that they've added, towards the end of this album. But it's I mean, honestly, probably being a title track on an album, I feel like sometimes often is the one that like stands out the most. I feel like this might be a little bit farther down on my favorite of the songs, but it does somewhat end the album in terms of like vocals on a very strong note. It is a good song. I really do like how it feels like at this point you're kind of dead. Like death is definitely like the overall theme of this album, and just the guitars are phenomenal once again on this. It is a very good song, but however, probably one of the ones that I feel like maybe I wouldn't bring up first talking about this album, but not to say it's bad. But definitely one of the ones I wrote the least amount on. So I don't know if I was getting into the point of where I stopped writing when I was listening to this, but yeah, no, it's a good song. I like it. Like I said, that creeping death rip in there. I feel like at this point they've come to a point on the album where it's like you can tell it's coming to an end, and it's almost like that solid ending that they added into this. And I feel like it fits well here. For that, it is definitely a strong song. There's definitely heavy moments to it. But yeah, I for some reason I didn't write a lot about that, so I don't know if I'm guessing it's probably just because I just like the song, and that was what I was going to say. Yeah, I like the song.
My favorite song ever by Nile. As I said, I have a top 25. So for me, it's my favorite is "Eat of the Dead," and I love that heaviness. And then "Lash to the Slave Stick," and then hold on, where is it? It is "Evil to Cast Out Evil." This song, "The Underworld Awaits Us All," is my fourth favorite song by the band.
Nice.
And I think it is absolutely brilliant. I will not be surprised if in a year's time this is my favorite song by the band. This is one that gives me chills. The other ones I mentioned by them, "Eat of the Dead" and "Lash of the Slave Stick" and "Evil to Cast Out Evil," and then my fourth is "To Walk Forth from the Flames Unscathed." Those five are masterpieces. Like, this band has, I think, 5 songs that sit above the rest, and 2 of them are from That Which Shall Not Be Unearthed, which is why I'm with Melanie thinking that album is undervalued in their catalog. because two of the best ones, and it's also really nice that they have an album that closes with a song that is that incredible. So I think this song is George Calais' finest hour. This song is on an album of nonstop tour de forces. This is the tour de force of tour de forces. It is so unbelievably great and tasty. And because of the varying tempi, he can show you so many different things, and he has space to give so much. So my favorite riff on the album is the head-banging hook in here that comes in at 52. It's the and it's the one with there's a tremolo version, a tremolo tag, and then a triplet tag of it. But it is, so it's like a 4-measure riff with a triplet pulse, and it is just it's amazing. And this song has a lot of parts. There's like a black metalish riff coming in about a minute and a half, and then there's an open section, and then there's this thing at about kind of like 3 minutes in where it almost seems like almost like an Injustice for All riff played in slow. It's like no, like it seems like someone is playing an Injustice for All lick at the wrong speed, and that intro is a little bit the intro of Creeping Death. I mean, the riff goes in a different place because it's it has that totally different tag, but it does call to mind, it does bring to mind that song. And in that creeping section at 3:12, where it's that kind of slow motion thrash with the like Calais is chopping it up. It just feels like a marriage is about to end with how contrary some of his playing is, and amazing. And as I say, like he's playing in the pocket. He's decorating the pocket. He's leading the charge. He's playing compound meter stuff on top of it. He's chopping it up and attacking the riffs. It's amazing stuff. And the solo that I assume is Carl. I don't know the voices of the other guitarists well enough. Like there was a point where I could say, oh, this is a Dallas Toller Wade solo, or this is a Carl solo. Kingsland and Jeter, I don't know their voices well enough to distinguish them. And obviously, Carl can play whatever he wants. So it's like any of this stuff could be him. But when it goes back to the triplet pulse riff with the it is written and the women back it, and I think conceptually the best idea on this album, and probably the best idea I heard in terms of music reflecting a concept on its own without the lyrics at all, is in this song. Because this song, The Underworld Awaits Us All, this song ends, but it doesn't. This song builds to a giant stadium ending. Song is over, they're kind of slowing down, and then it continues. And so you have this death of the song, but then you are beyond the death of the song, which is the underworld. So I'm like, that is a brilliant concept, that you let the song finish. Now I know that other part happens, but probably the first 3 or 4 times I heard this thing, I'm like, oh, this is the end. It's the big stadium finish with all the crashes and the double bass, and then they come out of it and start building in these other refrains. The true home is the underworld, which awaits us. Like, it's incredible. Headbanging. When the women come in, I get chills every time. And the harmonies for the true, it goes up much higher. These are notes I'm not singing correctly, but it goes to much higher points at 7:23. George Calais, 7:43. Fed up with life. People are coming to kill him. He's just attacking this song, and he's just chopping it into bits. It's great. This is a legitimate masterpiece, heavy metal song. As I said, right now I have it ranked as my 4th favorite song by the band. But I think because it's the war a bit against recency bias, and I'll see where it lands in a year.
Yeah.
That's
a thing. That is a thing.
That is a thing. And they, as I said, like they have 5 songs I rate above all others, and I just said what they were, and this is one of those. This is one of the best songs in death metal history, I feel, and it is the pinnacle performance of George Callias. It has been years and years since I have heard a drum performance on any song as good as the drum performance on this song by anyone in any genre. Like if someone, this is a song where I feel confident you could play it to a fusion jazz guy or someone who has no interest in death metal. Anybody who has any interest in drums, I think is going to be spellbound with the stuff that is going on in this track. It's his tour de force, one of the few best songs I think in Nile history, and one of the best songs I think in the genre. I adore this. I'll be surprised. I would expect, Melanie, I know you enjoy it, but in time I'll be curious where it lands, because for me this one and Nakata were kind of the two that leapt straight to the top, and never, those were always my 2 favorite. This one has quite a bit more, I think, in the way of parts, and it also has more in the way of slow stuff. But I do favor that mid-pace and slow stuff. I'd be happy if there were a Nile album that was 75% slow. I mean, Eat of the Dead is my favorite song by them. Yeah. So I really enjoy them working the pocket and listening to what Callias does in the pocket, and the guitar solos in the pocket. Those are my favorite.
Are great. Yeah. That's definitely the part of this song that the guitar solos are just so fantastic.
They're fantastic.
So yeah. I definitely think for me, I like 8 minutes is not anything in regards to a track length. Like I listen to so much music where it exceeds that.
Yeah.
I almost felt like I wanted a little bit more with this because I did get really into it. But the way that it ended, it did feel like very grandiose in that regard with what they were doing. But I absolutely love how this album ended. So we'll get to that when we get to the next track.
Yeah, and Craig nailed it. Melanie nailed it on this. It's one of the slower tracks on the album. I really like how downtrodden it feels, which it's like Carl and crew are trying to suffocate us with the weight of this track. And I suppose that trait perfectly fortifies the concept behind the lyrical theme here. The track eventually erupts with those perfect blasts and melodically advanced solos, and that "it is written" chants in the background. I mean, it seems like every song on here has one tag at least that lets the listener know where they are in the album's journey. This is another one of those songs. Whether it's musical, lyrical, or vocal, Nile has a way within their crushing din to give each song its own characteristic, which this album and this track in particular is filled with that. And it's got all the elements you want at the end, coming to a crescendo, and you're at the end of the album. It's where it should be. I mean, start with the bang, end with the bang. We're gonna go out on an instrumental here, which we're gonna talk about in a second. But this is the true full climactic track of the album, and wow, I love the build. I love the whole thing on this, how they composed it. Which leads us to the instrumental at the end, Lament for the Destruction of Time. Melanie.
So this song, I feel like I love the backstory of it. I'm glad that they provided that in the physical release of this. So Brian actually wrote this song, and it was untitled. They just called it Brian Doom 01 for the longest time. There was no vocals written to it for the longest time. And they essentially, after coming back to it, Carl tried to put vocals to it and it just didn't fit the track at all. And they felt that it just felt better to be an instrumental with how just intuitive it was. It was like, I feel like this is ending what I feel like is Nile's strongest album in a very long time. One of their more creative and one of their more musically talented albums. And it shows that there's no vocals. And I think it's kind of just a really good, this is where we are now. We've gone through this journey and this is the end of it. Almost like the ending credit song at this point. It's incredible. I love the back and forth of the guitars. The bends are there. Just all of that instrumentation on this song, all that instrumentation, creativity, and like all of that, just amazing musicianship is just there, and it doesn't overstay its welcome either at all. It ends, it ends in a perfect time, and it creates a really, really strong ending. And they did eventually name it Lament for the Destruction of Time when they realized that basically that they wanted just the composition and the music to do the storytelling for this. So they gave it that name. So it's a really cool background on that. I like it. I'm glad that they added this instrumentation. Sometimes I kind of hate when bands end an album with just instrumental tracks. Like sometimes it just drives me absolutely crazy when I'm listening to a black metal album and they ended on a dungeon soundtrack. I'm like, come on, like we got enough of that in this album. You're adding more to it now. But that's not how I feel about this at all.
Padding out the time unnecessary on an album.
No, and I don't think that they did that with this at all. I'm glad that they kept it in, and I think it ends the album perfectly.
Yeah, this is a good song. It took a moment because I was so blown away by the previous track, and it's the title track, and it is dealing with what happens after death, the thought that there's going to be something that follows it. But and there are many metal albums that have this outro. I think Borknagar was like Archaic Course, Old Domain. They were doing kind of stuff like this in that sort of era. And I remember there was a period, definitely in black metal, in particular, kind of late '90s and early aughts, where it's like, oh yeah, we're not going to end with the song. And for me, I think the most important song on an album is the last one, and then maybe the second most important is the opener. So I mean, it's kind of a bias of I'm talking about an album I would already listen to. I understand the concept of like the first song sets the mood and the intent and prepares you for the whole listening experience and reels you in. But for me, when the album ends, you're kind of left with what that last thing did. And so I like if it worked, I mean, obviously there are great songs that wouldn't be an entirely appropriate closer for any album.
Can you imagine Abigail ending with anything other than the Black Horseman? That dual guitar line at the end is just like, taking my breath away.
That's built, and there's a great example of an album that does end with a highlight. Yeah. So that the previous song for me, this is pretty much untouchable for them, and this is something that I really liked. What Should Not Be Unearthed, because that really does end with like one of the few best songs they've ever written. It took me a moment to accept that, like, okay, there's this instrumental that happens afterwards. It's not going to compare in terms of richness, headbanging, and all this sort of stuff. But every time I listen to this album, I like this thing more and more. I could say without question, it's my favorite of all the Kingsland tracks on this album and the previous. And the mood is great. Like they're putting you in that headspace through a metal song, and it's doomy. The leads that come in around like 144, there are these really plaintive leads that are coming in. It's also really nice with so many held chords and so much stacked guitar. Just the richness of guitar, which you're not hearing that much decay of these held chords in the other songs because it's so blazing fast, and there's an attack before there's any time for anything to decay. And so that sort of stuff and the long held stuff, the plaintive lead guitar stuff is great. This is a tune because of the space where George Callias shows it's like, yeah, this guy would be a phenomenal doom drummer. And the fills, particularly at 3 minutes, 34 seconds, are in that style that I adore so much by Vinny Appice, where there are some extra pauses. It's not just going around and it gets a little clumpy. Not that he's making any errors whatsoever, but leaving in all of like spaces so some of the impacts aren't quite where you expect. And an unexpected snare hit or snare with the crash, all this stuff on the toms. It's really, really good stuff. The solo at 3:31, and I'm assuming this is Carl, but again, I don't know the other guitar's tone and melodic sense well enough to differentiate. I assume it's Carl. But this is just a wailing tone yelling into the void, and it's very, very good. And in terms of if Nile wants to give me an atmospheric track that's not a burner and doesn't have vocals and all this sort of stuff, this is a really good direction. Like, this is a really good way to sit in the world of the song and with kind of the power and strength of death metal, and also give you this contemplative space. And it might just be me, but there's a riff in here that sort of echoes the "emboldened by dusk," like that refrain from the other song. I hear echoes of it here. So this really does feel a little bit like the looking back on the experience, and a little bit like looking back through the millennia to the time when the happenings of this album occurred. So it's really strong. And it took me a little bit of a while to warm up to it, because I'm like, man, your title cut on this album is so close to the end, and it's one of the best things you've ever written and one of the best songs in death metal history. Why not just end with that? But the album as a whole is serviced well by ending with this contemplative space, because the previous one, you're doing quite a bit of headbanging, or at least I am, and this is a little bit more reflecting on all the journeys passed through. So a really strong closer and a good idea to have this track in that spot. Like, actually, I think it's the only spot. Like, if this were in the middle, I'm not quite sure. Right. Anywhere else, I don't know what this song would do. I think this song is a good place for reflecting on the full experience while still in the mood and really sensing the passage of time and the antiquity of the visuals of the album.
If you're going to put a track like this in the middle of an album like this, it would indicate a massive change, I would think. But really, I agree. They put this at the perfect spot. There's so much weight before this track. I mean, really, unless you're going out with just a ripper, this is a good way to put a bow on this. I really love the double guitar lines and the solo in this thing. The notes just flow out at you, draped in melancholy. That's just it. There's just a very sad feeling to this one.
Yeah.
It's so advanced and just perfectly composed. And they get in, they get out. They don't beat you over the head with it. It says what it needs to say. It ends the album with class. I don't know. I think it's a great ending. Perfect ending for this record. And I guess that brings us to our final thoughts regarding this album. I think everybody kind of gets the idea where we're going here. But Melanie, what are you thinking on this?
I am thinking this is probably one of the best albums to come out this year in regards to death metal. It is, for Nile being one of my all-time favorite death metal bands, they are still proving to be one of the best death metal bands ever with this album. And like I said, Carl Sanders is just one of my favorite death metal guitarists, and I've always kind of had a little bit of adoration for him in the scene and just all the work that he's done with this band and who he is in regards to death metal. I absolutely love this album. I honestly find it hard to find flaws with it, even though I've mentioned there are some songs where I'd be okay if they weren't on the album, but that doesn't mean I didn't like the songs. It's hard to say anything bad about it. And I actually get a little bit like annoyed when I hear people nitpick it. I'm like, really? Like, come on now. Yeah. Like, do you really like this band? Because I don't think that you do if you're picking apart this album like you are. And yeah, I know I absolutely love this album. It has skyrocketed in regards to the amount of times I've listened. Each time I listen to it, I'm like, I'm gonna put it back on and listen to it again. In fact, it's actually kind of just completely derailed my rotation of albums that I've listened to ever since they came out, because I just listen to it all the time. And I tend to do that with Nile albums. I tend to get kind of obsessed with them and listen to them and binge their whole catalog, which is what I've done now since it came out. No, I absolutely love it. I definitely think it's within one of their best albums ever written. The fact that they're able to do that so far into their career just is incredible, because a lot of these, older death metal bands fail to do that. So to that point, I feel like they're one of the best ones around, and I'm really hoping I can see them when they come in Florida next month. Unfortunately, it's my son's birthday weekend, so we'll see.
Bring him with you. Happy birthday!
I know. Oh, because Mike, I would love to see these songs live. There's so many things about them that would be so fun to see live. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be at least top 3 favorite albums this year. Actually, it's been a little bit hard to top since it's come out. I love this album. I give it like, some days I wake up and I'm like, that's a perfect 10 out of 10 album. There's nothing bad about it at all. So yeah, I can go on forever and say how much I love it.
Yeah, this was great. I mean, this for me and this year in metal, and I'm very impressed with the showing of a lot of metal veterans. Borknagar, Saxon 1349, The Crown, Judas Priest. For me, and Nile as like 6 veteran bands where I could say this is my favorite album by each of those bands in like 15 years or more. I admit there are a couple of Saxon albums I haven't heard. I really love Lionheart, and then not most of the ones that followed that. There are probably a couple I missed, but for whatever reason, and I'm not sure why that is or pure coincidence. A lot of these bands that have been doing, I mean, most of those bands are pretty extreme and have been doing it for a long time. To have such a strong showing in this year, it's great. I mean, it's heartening. And in the case of Nile, this is my second favorite album by them in their entire catalog. So that's not something I expected to say. And I don't know the full stories and, insofar as the lineup changes and all this sort of stuff, but there's, whether you like them or not, there's such an undeniability about the effort and the work put in on these. And this album also sounds from the mix. I mean, we've all it's like, how much music are you listening to that's anywhere near this complicated, where it's this clear, but still powerful. And I believe that's probably
memorable. Most importantly,
and all of the things. So for these guys to do an album that ranks at the top of their of their catalog and is this top tier, it's heartening and impressive. And like Melanie, like, I was getting so into this album, I've respun their entire catalog, most of the albums, multiple times, and kind of reassess things in terms of long held favorites and some stuff shifted around. But this is a really strong offering. I mean, in terms of metal albums for the year, I really like the new Borknagar. I really like Necrot. The Priest is the new Priest album is super strong, and that's like, there are a bunch of other albums I really like that came out this year, but those are kind of 4 that stand above. And this thing it's incredibly impressive. And I think one of the things that has changed over time, even from like In Their Darkened Shrines, even from that album, which I think is kind of the first of their fully crystallized sound, and then I think for a lot of people, Annihilation of the Wicked is the one where they completely landed that sound. And I think this thing just shows innovation and forward thinking and a hunger and a passion and a love of metal that it's just very, very impressive. And it's really enjoyable. And you have a new album by a band that's been around for 30 years or so, and you get something like this that makes you want to listen to their entire catalog front to back and tons of those albums many times over. It's really enjoyable. And in doing that, discovering some of these other gems, like this Iskander Dual Karnan. This thing is phenomenal. I haven't listened to this song in forever. So just rediscovering those gems. So it's nice also when a new release re-energizes you to just kind of return to the full catalog and explore. And the one thing I'd say, because most of the press I've seen on this album has been extraordinarily positive. This music is so complicated that you really need to spend a lot of time with it. And I think Nile is at a bit of a disadvantage in terms of with top 10 lists and stuff like that, with critics who are literally looking at hundreds and hundreds of albums. because comprehension of this music requires more effort.
Yeah.
Like, feeling like with King Diamond, I'll compare him to King Diamond. With King Diamond, with the exception of the House of God album,
Yeah.
with every album I didn't really like, I learned just keep spinning it, and eventually it comes. Eventually you understand it and the labyrinthine logic, and the same thing goes on with a Nile album. I think all of them are worth owning. Annihilation of the Wicked, this album, Ithyphallic, and What Should Not Be Unearthed, that's the top tier for me. But there's really good stuff on all of them. And if you spend the time, you're going to find it. And this album, because I think over time, Carl's ability to come up with really good hooks and memorable hooks, or willingness to include them, whichever way it is, has gotten stronger. Like, you know, with like Ithyphallic has that incredible run of songs 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This thing, I think, has the most refrains where if I haven't listened to this album in, say, 6 months and I look at the back, I could start humming riffs or singing refrains or whatever it is. It's like there's an immediacy with that. And at the same time, the music is just as impressive and ambitious as it ever was. So it's hats off. It's a really good album and worth apparently 3 hours of discussion.
Yes. Well, to capitalize on what you're saying about Carl's the way he writes hooky riffs and stuff, he's an older guy. He came from the rock world, man. I mean, you're an older guy. I mean, I grew up listening to rock radio, ABBA. I mean, I'm not speaking for Carl. I'm speaking for me. But you know, you just get you're fed in your formative years how popular music and rock, and you know, it relies on big hooks, not big hooks, but hooks. You know, certain songwriting formulas that are appealing to a wider group of people. Then, you know, what I really like about Nile is they put that into an extreme death metal context. And I see them as a veteran band too, an old school band, but they're an old school band that wasn't just okay by being, you know, putting out, you know, the same Cannibal Corpse record or the same Suffocation record. They're putting out albums that they say a lot. They have a lot to say, and they're maintaining their veteran old school roots, but embracing the modern age. They did that early on with bringing that computer he used to bring on stage with them back in the day with the foot pedals to set off the samples and stuff. You know, I saw that when it was happening, and wow, this is just mind blowing how they can make that all work. He was always at the forefront of technology. You know, how am I going to make this work? What we're doing on album live, and I have to give my hats off to that guy for, like, you know, Craig said, passion, dedication, and love for this type of music. This is what he's been doing. You know, granted, he's got his own solo projects as well that are more meditative, more atmospheric type of stuff. This here is just, you get a Nile record, you know it's going to be Nile. And the fact that this far down the road, he is still trying to bring the old spirit of death metal into the modern age with something so complex yet something that you can sink your teeth into and remember. And he's doing so by staying true to what he's been doing and not embracing, like, you know, frilly prog minute things that just, some of these bands are, I'm going to write a death metal song and then stick this prog thing in the center of it and be like, look how cool I am. You know, this,
right.
I have a hard time with that stuff. I know it's popular right now. A lot of bands are doing it. It's talented. It just feels, I don't know how it feels disingenuous in a way, but still, how do you expect bands to evolve unless they try something new? I hate to be the old guy saying it isn't the way it's supposed to be done.
One thing I'll just sort of add to what you're saying insofar as that goes is, yeah, an innovation with death metal could be to throw in a bunch of Pink Floyd music and Franz, or an innovation with death metal music could be to innovate more interesting death metal.
Yeah.
And so that's why Nile has never lost a thread.
No.
And
they have something so unique they can hold on to it and nurture it. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like that is a dude who could just go out and do a classical album, could go out and do completely different stuff, but wants to express himself with metal and make the metal more interesting.
Yep.
And this is an album where if you pulled back all of those other layers, it's just a badass metal record. Yep. And so that's, I know what you're saying, and most of the let's say the majority of bands that are doing like really progressive death metal, they just lose the thread for me. I'm just sort of lukewarm on them. I don't dislike them, but I like the empowerment and the headbanging. Like if it's death metal, I'm looking for that. Like I grew up on progressive rock. That was the music that got me into metal. So when I want to listen to progressive music, I'm pulling out an ELP album and Pink Floyd and Jethro Tull and Genesis and Jeff Giant and Museo Rosenbach. And like I'm pulling out progressive rock. And as I said, like I mentioned earlier, the Blood Incantation album, I think is pretty enjoyable. That has a ton of digressions. And I think some of the success with that is the end of the last song is the best part of the entire album. And it culminates with metal. And there's like a mellotron or something underneath it. But like, I think that's some of why that one is landing at the success. I don't think that album is anywhere near as good as this. I know it's probably the best. Like, it seems like it's one of the best liked by the metal press, and I enjoy that album. I wish the proportion of death metal on there were higher, but that to me is the reason why there's no sellout Nile album. Like the one that people object to the most is that At the Gate of Sethu, because it has clean production, and I think some not great choices with the vocals. That's definitely low on the list for me. But they've never they've never done stuff where they're not innovating with death metal and where the death metal isn't the dominant sound for the major part of the album. So anyways, you were saying.
No, basically that was where I was going with this. And the fact that he can take such complex music and has the knowledge and the tools to take this out on the road and play it. I mean, the last time I saw my band open for him, and to see it live, it's just impressive. It doesn't sound like a mess. Typically you go to a live show, the vocals and the drums are the two loudest things. Here, that's fine. The guitars are also up there. It's just a good mix. And he surrounds himself, him and George surround themselves with the right people to get the job done. And, for this late in the game and their 8th album and it to be this awesome, thumbs up. If I had to give it a grade, it's a 9.5 for me. And it has a lot of replayability, which I don't often say when it comes to highly technical music. Highly technical music, I like the dog and pony show of it, but when I'm done the first 2 or 3 times listening to it, it sits on the shelf. That's where it lives. I don't ever really return to it. An album like this, it's got enough tags in it for replayability's sake. So yeah,
for sure.
That's that. And before we jump, I wanted to thank you both for joining me on this discussion. And I want to find out what you got going on in your channels. Well, Melanie, what's going on Melanie Loves Death Metal coming up? You're a weekly, couple times a week with your updates.
Yeah. So this week I'm actually going to be probably only uploading like 1 or 2 videos because I'm recording my year-end lists, which take a long time because I actually edit those videos as opposed to my other videos I don't. But I do have a year-end giveaway going on right now on my channel that ends on the 27th, where I'm giving away like 7 CDs and 3 tapes, like tons of stuff that I collected over the years purposely just to celebrate the end of the year. Because this was one of the more successful years for me, or I gained a lot of subscribers this year and a little bit more reach. And I think having Metallurgy probably has a lot to do with that. So I have the year-end giveaway going on right now. All you have to do is just go comment on the video. It's open internationally, so there's no restrictions on it. And yeah, my year-end lists are coming. I just actually dropped my favorite EPs and demos of the year, which typically I don't usually do, but there was several this year that I wanted to make sure that people got they knew about, that I enjoyed. But yeah, this is my favorite time of the year in the YouTube underground death metal scene. All these lists going out because I always find stuff that I missed that I end up really enjoying. Yeah. And so far that's already happened. Like several of the YouTubers that I'm pretty close with, like Matt over at Altars of Madness, and he's already put up his list, and there's several things on there that I haven't heard that I've gone and listened to and really enjoy. So yeah, so just all the year-end stuff and rounding out, and then I'm going to take a little break there after that gets released, after the final like year-end list I do, and do the holiday stuff with my family, and come back in January, second week of January, and be like, all right, here's what I missed last year, because by then everybody will be throwing all of their suggestions at me of what I missed and what I should be listening to.
Right. Awesome. That's Craig Zahler. what have you got that has come out? What's going on in your universe?
Sure. Well, first, again, I'll recommend that people subscribe to Melanie Loves Death Metal. It's a great channel. Every year, I buy many of the releases in her top 10s and 20s and 25s and all those lists. And I'm going to echo what she said in terms of this is a great time of year. Insofar as I really watch feeds, even of people I don't follow, of their top 25, top 30, top 50, whatever it is, and just discover stuff at the end. This always happens at this time of year. Like, this is where you'll learn about a stress angel, or a vicious blade. This is the Sam Pantley. Probably some royalty should go to Carl Sanders on that one. It's enjoyable. Cephalotropsy, Traveler, lots of cool stuff. So I learn about things. Checking that out. My hunger for discovering new music hasn't diminished at all over time, and so I enjoy watching all the videos that are posted. But find Melanie's better than the rest. I just get more stuff from hers, and have been a long time follower. So in terms of stuff going on in my world, my next feature film there were delays. I was supposed to already be shooting, and this is the way it goes. He's like, this actor's schedule becomes this, financing this. We've got to shoot at this location. Hope to be shooting something in the not too distant future. I have the Bookie and the Bruiser was announced, and I've got a solid cast with that, but that stuff shifts over time, and I'll see where that goes. I have a couple of other projects in that world, stuff that's actually out in this world already. I had a noise, power electronics, death industrial, whatever, sort of music concrete, sort of between all those genres. Album I released with my songwriting partner, Jeff Harriet. We do all the music for my movies, and we do the epic doomy band Realm Builder. This is called Mindscrubber, and it's on Chondritic Sound if you like noise. And it's pretty noisy, as you might expect. It's not all harsh noise wall. You probably got about 7 minutes of the album. It's just pure inundation with noise. So fairly extreme stuff if you're into that. The last newer work of mine to be published is this comic that I wrote and drew and inked and lettered called Organisms from an Ancient Cosmos. And that's out from Dark Horse. And then very recently, I regained the rights for my favorite of my books, which is a book called Hug Chickenpenny, the Panegyric of an Anomalous Child. So a little in the Carl Sanders world for the full title there, but really just Hug Chickenpenny.
Minus the feces and apes.
Yeah, minus. And this is, I got the rights back. So this was a book that was kind of getting expensive for people to acquire, and you can just get it on Amazon cheaply at this point. And it is a gothic orphan fable. So very different from my other really violent stuff. And I can see the reviews online appealing to a different crowd. So I adore this book. It's quite different from the other things that I've done, and it is out again. So that's some of the stuff that's going on there, and hope to have some more concrete movie announcement developments, movie development announcements in the near future as well. But, in addition to all that, just listening to, a ton of metal, and as I always do, and, enjoying my kind of time between projects, between the last couple things that I wrote, which, those might be announced if they go forward, and the next thing that I write or draw or album I record. So always keeping busy and always buying more metal.
Right on. Well, this was an awesome conversation. It was a pleasure having you both with me as usual. Thanks again. And everybody go click on the links below, and don't forget to go support the Wagners. Link to their GoFundMe in the description as well. And that's it. And as far as Heavy Metallurgy goes, I just set up a Discord server tonight for some crazy reason. So link to that in the description. My kid helped me set that up, so hopefully it works right. I don't know. He knows what he's doing. I don't know anything about it, so we're gonna try to get through it. But until next time, check out Heavy Metallurgy for more reviews, more live streams, and more metal. Thanks a bunch. We will see you next time.